30 minutes before the biggest title fight of the year, UFC champion Damon Cross kicked an old Cutman's medical case across the locker room floor.
Pick it up. Then remember who matters in this room.
Millions of viewers saw a limping 64-year-old man being mocked for daring to question an undefeated champion.
And laugh now. In less than 2 hours, you may be begging me to save him.
What the cameras failed to notice was the tiny, involuntary tremor moving through Damon's dominant right hand.
My hand is fine. Keep filming.
Elias noticed that Damon's left pupil reacted later than the right, a subtle sign hidden beneath the champion's confidence.
Your left eye is delayed. Do not step into that cage.
Then Elias saw the swollen scar behind Damon's left ear and recognized a warning he had spent 22 years trying to forget.
I saw this mark once before. That fighter never came home.
Elias immediately demanded a complete neurological examination before Damon was allowed to move any closer to the arena.
The fight stops here until a neurologist clears you.
Damon asked why a man who applied Vaseline and wiped blood believed he had the authority to stop an undefeated champion.
You wipe blood off fighters. You do not decide whether champions fight.
Elias did not raise his voice. He simply warned that a championship could be won again, while a damaged brain might never recover.
You can replace a belt. You cannot replace the man wearing it.
Damon's father immediately dismissed the medical warning and accused the old Cutman of creating unnecessary panic before the championship fight.
You are here to wrap hands, not make decisions. Get on your knees. Show the world you still know your place.
The room laughed while Elias gathered the same instruments he had used for 12 years to keep injured fighters alive.
They always laugh before they understand the danger.
Elias knew those signs because 22 years earlier, he had ignored them in another fighter and buried his own brother days later.
Not again. I will not let another fighter die for Grant Cross.
30 minutes before the biggest title fight of the year, UFC champion Damon Cross kicked an old Cutman's medical case across the locker room floor and watched gauze, scissors, and blood-stopping tools scatter beneath the cameras. Millions of viewers saw a limping 64-year-old man being mocked for daring to question an undefeated champion. What they didn't see was the tiny tremor in Damon's right hand, the delayed reaction in his left pupil, or the swollen scar hidden behind his ear. Elias Ward saw all three. He knew those signs because 22 years earlier, he had ignored them in another fighter and buried his own brother days later. Elias warned that Damon could die if he entered the cage, but Damon's father ordered the fight to continue. Then, with the cameras still rolling, Damon told the old man to remember his place. Less than 2 hours later, the champion would collapse unconscious, and the only person capable of saving him would be the man he had just humiliated. The humiliation lasted less than a minute, but the video spread before Elias had even finished gathering his tools from the floor. Damon's media team clipped away the medical warning, removed every mention of the tremor and the delayed pupil response, and uploaded only the moment when the champion dismissed a limping old man who appeared to have interrupted his preparation. Within an hour, the footage had millions of views. Fans praised Damon for protecting his focus. Commentators laughed at the Cutman, who seemed to believe he knew more than an undefeated champion's private doctors. Some people mocked Elias's age. Others imitated his uneven walk. Almost no one asked why a man who had spent more than a decade keeping fighters alive had been willing to risk his career just hours before the biggest event of the year. Elias did not watch the video. He had learned long ago that crowds were often loudest when they understood the least. He simply returned each instrument to the dented metal case Damon had kicked across the floor. He checked the scissors for damage, replaced the contaminated gauze, and closed the lid with the same careful hands that had sealed thousands of cuts. Only Serena Blake remained beside him. She was the physician assigned by the State Athletic Commission, young enough to be dismissed by the men surrounding Damon, but experienced enough to know fear when she saw it. Elias was not angry. He was afraid. Serena asked what he had noticed. Elias explained that the trembling in Damon's dominant hand was not ordinary pre-fight tension. His left pupil had responded a fraction of a second later than the right, and the swelling behind his ear suggested recent trauma. Any one of those signs could have had an innocent explanation. Together, they demanded a neurological examination before he was allowed anywhere near the cage. Serena admitted that Damon's official records showed no recent concussion and no dangerous injury. Elias answered that records only revealed what people chose to put inside them. That sentence followed Serena after she left the room. Damon Cross had been built for moments like this one. At 29, he possessed the speed, reach, and aggression that promoters loved. His record stood at 18 victories and no defeats. His face appeared on energy drinks, sportswear campaigns, luxury watches, and towering screens along the Las Vegas Strip. He did not merely enter arenas. He arrived inside storms of light, music, and carefully manufactured certainty. His father, Grant Cross, had spent more than 20 years constructing that certainty around him. Grant had once been a fighter himself, though few fans remembered his career. He had been strong enough to enter professional cages, but never disciplined enough to remain near the top. Every loss had become an insult he carried home. By the time Damon was 6, Grant had already decided his son would succeed where he had failed. Childhood games became reaction drills. Family vacations were scheduled around wrestling camps. Praise came after victories, while silence followed mistakes. Damon learned early that his father's affection warmed when he won and vanished when he did not. By 14, Damon could outstrike grown amateurs. By 18, he was being promoted as the future of mixed martial arts. By 25, he held a major championship. Grant called it destiny. In truth, it was talent shaped by fear. Damon did not know how to separate love from achievement or identity from applause. The championship belt was not simply proof that he was the best fighter in his division. It was the object that convinced him he deserved to exist. That was why he hid the headaches. They had begun as pressure behind his eyes after hard sparring sessions. Then came the flashes of light, the moments when familiar rooms seemed briefly unfamiliar, and the strange gaps in his memory. He would finish a combination and forget which strike had begun it. He sometimes woke with his jaw clenched and his right hand shaking beneath the sheets. Grant called it fatigue. Owen Pike, the team physician, called it manageable. Damon called it nothing at all. Owen had treated Damon for 6 years. He was licensed, respected, and increasingly trapped. At first, Grant had asked him to make small adjustments, delay the reporting of a bruise, describe a concussion as dehydration, clear Damon after one additional day of rest. Each compromise made the next one easier. Eventually, Owen was recording memory loss as sleep disruption and hand tremors as muscle fatigue. He told himself he was protecting Damon's career. In reality, he was protecting his own position inside a powerful team. The week before the title defense, Damon had been knocked down during a closed sparring session. His head struck the mat hard enough to silence the gym. For nearly 10 seconds, he stared at the ceiling without moving. When he finally sat up, he asked why everyone had stopped training. Owen recommended brain imaging and immediate withdrawal from the fight. Grant reminded him that the event had already generated tens of millions of dollars, that the main sponsor could cancel its contract, and that Owen's medical practice depended heavily on athletes managed by the Cross organization. The scan was never ordered. Instead, Damon received pain medication, a stimulant described as a legal recovery aid, and instructions to avoid unnecessary questions during the official examination. His blood sample was replaced with one collected from a healthy training partner. The altered paperwork passed through the system without resistance because Grant had spent years surrounding his son with people who understood the cost of saying no. Elias understood that cost better than any of them. For 12 years, he had worked as a cutman in the shadows of professional fighting. Most spectators noticed him only when blood appeared. Between rounds, he had 60 seconds to control swelling, slow bleeding, assess fractures, and decide whether a fighter's face was damaged or whether something deeper was failing behind it. He was not supposed to diagnose. He was not supposed to challenge physicians. He was expected to keep the athlete functional and disappear when the camera returned. Yet fighters trusted him because Elias never confused courage with survival. He knew when a man wanted to continue because he was capable, and when he wanted to continue because fear had made stopping feel impossible. He had seen athletes lie about blurred vision, numb fingers, lost time, and vomiting in private bathrooms. Some feared losing money. Others feared losing respect. A few feared the people in their own corners. Elias never mocked that fear. He simply refused to help it kill them. Years earlier, a young featherweight had complained of exhaustion after sparring. The team physician recommended fluids and sleep. Elias watched the fighter walk toward the locker room, and noticed his left foot dragging half an inch behind the right. He insisted on emergency imaging. Doctors discovered a small brain bleed before it became fatal. The fighter survived, but the incident made Elias unpopular with managers who believed caution cost them money. Serena had heard that story, but had never known Elias was the Cutman involved. When she searched his name in the commission database, she expected to find routine licensing records. Instead, she discovered that Elias Ward had once held a medical license. 2 decades earlier, he had been one of the youngest sports neurologists in Nevada. His research focused on repeated head trauma in combat athletes before the subject received serious public attention. He had published studies on delayed pupil response, fine motor tremors, and the danger of allowing fighters to compete while symptoms remained hidden. Then, without explanation, his career ended. His license was suspended after the death of an athlete at an unregulated event. The athlete's name was Jonah Ward, Elias's younger brother. The official record said Elias had medically cleared Jonah to fight. It said Jonah collapsed after the final round and died from an undetected brain hemorrhage. It also said Elias had failed to report symptoms that should have prevented the contest. Serena read the report twice. The signature at the bottom belonged to Elias. The conclusion seemed clear, yet something about the timestamps bothered her. The document had been entered into the system after the event had already begun. Before she could examine it further, Grant Cross appeared at the commission office. He carried himself with the calm authority of a man accustomed to seeing doors open before he touched them. He did not demand that Serena clear Damon. He spoke instead about responsibility, economic damage, and the danger of allowing an unstable former doctor to interfere with a major event. He placed a copy of Elias's old disciplinary record on her desk and suggested that grief had made the Cutman obsessive. According to Grant, Elias saw his dead brother in every injured fighter and created emergencies where none existed. Serena asked whether Damon had been knocked unconscious during sparring. Grant's expression changed only slightly. He answered that champions were hit in training, that temporary disorientation was not the same as a concussion, and that all required forms had been completed. Then he reminded Serena that accusing a fighter without evidence could destroy her career as easily as it could destroy his son's. She understood the message. That afternoon, the commission announced that Damon Cross remained medically cleared to defend his title against Malik Turner. The announcement was celebrated across sports media. Damon appeared at the ceremonial weigh-in wearing sunglasses beneath the indoor lights. He laughed, flexed for the crowd, and promised another finish. When Malik stepped onto the stage, he did not respond to the insults. He watched Damon's hands instead. The right one trembled before Damon closed it into a fist. Malik had fought him 3 years earlier. The official record showed that Damon had won by unanimous decision, but the match had never felt clean. Damon's reactions had been unnaturally sharp in the early rounds, followed by sudden periods of confusion. After the fight, an anonymous source sent Malik's manager laboratory data, suggesting Damon had used a prohibited stimulant. Grant offered money, a future title opportunity, and silence. Malik accepted all three. He had told himself that speaking out would sound like an excuse from a defeated fighter. He had told himself that the payment would support his family, and that he would earn another chance fairly. But every victory after that carried the weight of what he had allowed. Now, standing across from Damon again, Malik recognized the same unnatural tension in his eyes, mixed with something worse. Damon did not look enhanced. He looked damaged. Backstage, Elias was informed that his credentials had been suspended, pending investigation. Grant's lawyers accused him of interfering with a licensed physician, disrupting event operations, and making defamatory claims about the champion. He was ordered to leave the arena. Before doing so, Elias found Serena and gave her a folded piece of paper. It contained a list of neurological tests that should be performed immediately. He told her that Damon's condition might appear stable until another impact changed everything. Serena asked why he was so certain. Elias looked toward the corridor where fighters waited beneath fluorescent lights and admitted that he had once seen the same signs in Jonah. He did not tell her the whole story. Not yet. 22 years earlier, Jonah Ward had been a gifted lightweight with quick hands and reckless courage. He fought because their family was drowning in debt and because local promoters promised more money than either brother had seen. Elias had already begun warning about the dangers of repeated concussions. He monitored Jonah closely and tried to keep him away from unregulated events. Grant Cross was one of the men organizing those events. At the time, Grant's fighting career was collapsing. He had discovered that promoting desperate athletes could be more profitable than becoming one. The rules were flexible, the medical supervision was weak, and the audiences paid to see violence without interruption. When Jonah developed headaches and balance problems before an important bout, Elias demanded that he be removed. Grant threatened to blacklist both brothers. Jonah begged Elias not to destroy their only opportunity to clear the family's debts. Under pressure, exhausted and afraid, Elias placed his signature on a document Grant described as a temporary evaluation. He believed there would still be time for a final examination before the fight. There was not. Jonah entered the cage before Elias even reached the medical station. He absorbed repeated blows to the head and collapsed later that night. Grant's people produced the signed document, blamed Elias, and erased every record showing that Jonah had already been fighting when the form was completed. Elias lost his brother, his profession, and the ability to trust his own judgment. For years, he believed one weak signature had killed Jonah. He never defended himself publicly. Shame made silence feel like punishment, and punishment felt like the closest thing to justice he deserved. Eventually, he returned to combat sports as a cutman. It was the lowest position that allowed him close enough to recognize danger. He could not restore Jonah's life, but he could keep another fighter from being sacrificed by people who called exploitation an opportunity. Now Grant was doing the same thing to his own son. Fight night arrived beneath lights bright enough to hide almost anything. More than 20,000 spectators filled the arena. Millions watched from around the world. Damon's entrance was a spectacle of smoke, gold light, and roaring music. His perfect record appeared across the screens: 18 victories, 0 defeats. Grant followed him toward the cage with one hand on his shoulder, presenting them as father and son, champion and creator. Elias watched from a small technical room beneath the stands. Serena had not been able to restore his access, but one sympathetic employee allowed him to view the medical feed. From a distance, he studied Damon's breathing as the introductions began. Damon bounced lightly on his feet. His left side moved freely. His right hand opened and closed as if trying to recover sensation. The first round began at a furious pace. Damon pressured Malek toward the fence and threw combinations designed to overwhelm him before strategy could matter. His speed remained dangerous. He landed a sharp knee, followed by a right hand that opened a cut near Malek's eyebrow. The crowd responded exactly as Grant expected, but Malek noticed that Damon reacted late whenever attacks came from his right side. Instead of exploiting it immediately, he tested the weakness with feints. Damon flinched after strikes had already stopped. Twice, he turned his head as though following movement that was no longer there. Damon still won the round. In his corner, Owen examined him and asked whether he could see clearly. Damon gave the answer Grant required. The tremor had become more visible, but Owen covered Damon's hand with a towel when the camera moved closer. Elias leaned toward the monitor. He recognized the small delay before Damon answered questions. It was not exhaustion. His brain was struggling to process information. The second round opened with Malik changing levels and forcing Damon to defend takedowns. Damon remained powerful, but his balance failed in brief, alarming moments. After absorbing a routine jab, he stumbled as if the canvas had shifted beneath him. The commentators described it as unusual footwork. Elias knew better. Serena was seated near the cage as part of the commission medical team. Elias called her and urged her to request another examination between rounds. Serena approached the senior physician, but Grant intercepted the request. He argued that Damon was responding, defending himself, and winning. Without an obvious collapse, the senior physician refused to stop a championship bout based on subtle signs. Subtle signs were how fighters died. By the end of the second round, Damon returned to his corner, breathing through his mouth. Owen asked him what round had just ended. Damon stared at him and answered incorrectly. Grant heard it. For a moment, even he looked afraid. Owen recommended stopping the fight. Grant reminded him that Damon had trained his entire life for this night. He insisted that confusion between rounds was common under pressure. Then he leaned close enough that the microphones almost missed him and warned Owen that ending the bout would end both of their careers. Damon caught only part of the exchange. He asked why they were whispering. Grant placed a hand against his son's face and told him that champions did not surrender their future because of a headache. Damon nodded. The words reached the frightened child, still living beneath the champion's skin. He stood before the bell. In the third round, Malik stopped treating Damon like an opponent and began treating him like an injured man. He reduced his power and focused on movement, hoping the officials would notice the imbalance. The crowd booed what they believed was caution. Grant screamed for Damon to attack. Damon rushed forward and was caught by a short left hook. It was not the hardest punch of the fight, but his body reacted as though a cord had been cut. His knees dipped. His eyes lost focus. Malik stepped back instead of following him down. The referee waved him forward. Damon recovered enough to continue, driven by instinct and years of conditioning. He landed a body kick and forced Malik against the cage. To the audience, it looked like a dramatic comeback. To Elias, every second looked like a countdown. When Damon returned to his corner, he looked directly at Grant and asked where his father was. Grant stood less than a foot away. Owen's face went pale. He reached for the official and said the fight had to end. Grant seized his wrist beneath the camera line. Damon blinked several times, recognized his father again, and insisted he could continue. The senior physician asked him basic questions. Damon answered after Grant silently shaped the responses with his mouth. He was cleared for the fourth round. Elias left the technical room. His credentials no longer mattered. Neither did the lawsuit, the suspension, or the threat of arrest. He moved through the service corridors toward the arena floor, his damaged legs slowing him, but not stopping him. Security blocked the final entrance. From behind the barrier, he could hear the crowd chanting Damon's name. Inside the cage, Malik tried to keep distance. Damon, frightened by the emptiness appearing inside his own mind, became more aggressive. He swung wildly, missed, and drove Malik toward the fence. During the exchange, Damon struck the back of Malik's head after the referee had moved to the wrong side. Malik collapsed to one knee. Damon continued punching. The referee intervened seconds later and declared the fight over. The arena exploded. Damon Cross remained undefeated. Grant entered the cage and wrapped the championship belt around his son. Cameras captured the image of triumph, the golden champion, his proud father, the perfect record preserved. Malik sat against the fence, aware that the finishing sequence had been illegal, but too dazed to protest. Damon lifted his arms, then his expression changed. The light seemed to separate into streaks. The sound of the audience grew distant. He looked at the belt around his waist as though he had never seen it before. During the post-fight interview, he repeated the same sentence twice. The broadcaster assumed he was overwhelmed with emotion. Grant ended the interview early and guided him backstage. Elias reached the corridor just as security received orders to remove him from the building. He tried to warn them that Damon required immediate imaging. Grant appeared and accused him of stalking the champion. He demanded that Elias be taken away. Then a crash came from inside the locker room. Damon had fallen beside the treatment table. When Elias forced his way through the doorway, Owen was preparing an injection intended to calm what he believed was a panic reaction. Damon's body was rigid, but the convulsions were so small that most of the room failed to recognize them as seizures. Elias did. He knocked the syringe from Owen's hand, turned Damon onto his side, protected his airway, and ordered someone to call an ambulance. Grant shouted that Elias had no authority. Elias ignored him. He checked Damon's pupils and found the left one expanding. That was the sign he had feared. Pressure was building inside Damon's skull. Every minute mattered. Elias instructed the emergency team not to treat the collapse as exhaustion. He gave them the exact sequence of symptoms and demanded that the hospital prepare for intracranial bleeding. Damon was rushed through the service entrance while cameras gathered outside. At the hospital, surgeons discovered a subdural hematoma. The bleeding had likely begun before the fight and worsened with each impact. Because Elias had identified the signs and insisted on immediate surgery, doctors operated before the pressure caused irreversible damage. Damon survived. The surgeon later estimated that another 10 minutes might have killed him. But before that truth reached the public, Grant created a different story. He told reporters that Elias Ward, a disgraced former doctor with a personal obsession, had entered the locker room illegally and interfered with Damon's treatment. A silent security clip showed Elias knocking the syringe away, holding Damon's head and shouting instructions. Without sound or context, the rescue looked violent. By morning, Elias had been arrested for trespassing and suspected assault. His Cutman license was revoked. Grant's lawyers claimed his actions had endangered the champion and demanded millions in damages. Damon remained unconscious and unable to contradict them. Owen said nothing. Serena watched the edited footage and knew it was false, but suspicion was not proof. She began searching the medical records, blood samples, and old commission files. Malik, recovering from the illegal strike, watched Grant praise Damon's courage while avoiding every question about the symptoms before the fight. The lie was becoming too large for either of them to ignore. Elias spent the night in a holding cell with Jonah's memory closer than it had been in years. Once again, Grant Cross had placed an injured fighter inside a cage. Once again, Elias had tried to stop him. And once again, a document bearing Elias's name was being used to make him look responsible. But this time, Grant had made one mistake. He believed guilt had kept Elias silent because Elias was weak. He did not understand that Elias had spent 22 years preparing for the moment when silence would become more painful than the truth. And while Grant stood before the cameras claiming that his son had been attacked by a dangerous old man, Serena discovered that Damon's blood sample did not belong to Damon at all. The mismatched blood sample changed the investigation from a dispute over medical judgment into evidence of deliberate deception. Serena traced the identification code to a healthy welterweight who trained at the same facility as Damon, but had never been scheduled for the event. The sample had been collected 2 days before Damon's official test, stored under a different label, and quietly entered into the commission system by an assistant linked to Owen Pike's clinic. For the first time, Serena had something stronger than intuition. She copied the records before anyone could erase them and contacted an investigator outside the local commission office. She also requested the original neurological screening, the chain of custody for Damon's sample, and every medical report submitted by the Cross team during the previous 5 years. Grant learned about the request within hours. He immediately ordered Owen to destroy anything that could connect the team to altered tests. He told him the entire organization would collapse if the public learned Damon had competed while showing symptoms of brain trauma. Owen was reminded that he had signed every clearance, accepted every payment, and benefited from every victory. Grant made it clear that if someone had to fall, the doctor would fall first. That threat finally broke something in Owen. For years, he had treated compromise like a staircase. Each step had seemed small enough to justify a delayed report, a softer diagnosis, a missing symptom, a sample collected again for convenience. By the time he realized how far he had descended, he could no longer see the place where honesty had ended. He went home that night and opened a locked cabinet. Inside were copies of the records he had been too afraid to destroy. They documented Damon's headaches, memory gaps, hand tremors, and episodes of confusion. They also showed the dates when Grant had ordered him to change the language. Concussion became fatigue. Loss of consciousness became temporary disorientation. Neurological warning became stress response. The records proved that the danger had not appeared on fight night. It had been building for months. Owen still did not come forward. Fear held him in place. But fear was beginning to lose. At the hospital, Damon woke to a room without cameras. The championship belt was not beside him. The first thing he felt was pain behind his eyes. The second was weakness along the right side of his body. His fingers responded slowly when he tried to move them. Grant was there before the doctors finished explaining the surgery. He assured his son that the fight had been won, the belt was secure, and the public believed Elias caused the collapse by interfering backstage. Damon struggled to remember the locker room. He recalled lights, Malik's left hook, and then fragments of Elias's voice cutting through the confusion. Grant dismissed those memories as the effects of brain trauma. He told Damon that Elias had spent years blaming their family for his own failures and had used the champion's collapse as an opportunity for revenge. Damon was weak, frightened, and still dependent on the man who had defined reality for him since childhood. He accepted the explanation because the alternative was unbearable. If Elias had been right, then Damon had mocked the man trying to save his life. If the fight had been unsafe, then his father had known. And if the record had been protected by lies, then the identity Damon had built around it was beginning to disappear. He chose not to ask more. Grant arranged for a carefully controlled statement from the hospital. It described Damon as recovering well and blamed Elias for creating unnecessary chaos. The statement praised the champion's courage, thanked the medical staff, and made no mention of the subdural hematoma that had already been developing before the first bell. The public turned against Elias with terrifying speed. Old footage of his medical suspension was replayed across sports networks. Commentators described him as unstable, bitter, and desperate for relevance. The photograph of Jonah was published without context, turning a dead young fighter into a prop for speculation. Reporters gathered outside Elias's apartment. Promotions quietly removed his name from future events. Men whose cuts he had closed and whose careers he had protected avoided his calls. The most painful silence came from fighters who knew better. Some had seen Damon's symptoms. Some had seen Grant pressure doctors. Some had watched Elias save athletes no one else believed were in danger. But professional fighting was a small world controlled by a few powerful people, and courage often disappeared when contracts were threatened. Elias did not defend himself online. He did not give angry interviews or beg the public to believe him. He spent his time reviewing every detail he could remember from fight night. He wrote down Damon's symptoms in order: the moment he had seen the tremor, the delay in the pupil, the confusion between rounds, and the seizure in the locker room. He knew memory alone would not defeat Grant. He needed the truth to survive without him. Serena visited Elias after he was released pending investigation. She showed him the mismatched sample and asked whether he recognized the name of the clinic assistant who had handled it. Elias did. The assistant had worked in Grant's organization during the final years of the underground events. That connection widened the case. Serena then showed Elias the old report from Jonah's death. The signature was his, but the digital timestamp proved the document had been created after the event had begun. Elias stared at the page for a long time. He remembered Grant placing it before him in a dim medical room. He remembered being told that Jonah had not yet entered the cage. He remembered believing he still had a chance to stop the bout after signing the temporary form. The timestamp suggested something far worse. Jonah may already have been fighting. Elias had spent 22 years believing his signature opened the cage door. Now there was a possibility the door had already closed before he touched the paper. Serena told him they needed the original event records, but the promotion had dissolved years earlier, and most of its files were missing. Elias remembered one person who might still possess them: Malik Turner. 3 years before the title fight, after losing to Damon, Malik had received an anonymous package containing laboratory data and audio from the cross-training camp. He had kept everything, even after accepting money to remain silent. He told himself he saved the files as insurance. In truth, he kept them because shame would not let him destroy the evidence of what he had done. After the recent fight, Malik listened to the audio again. One recording contained Grant discussing Damon's stimulant use and promising to replace the official sample. Another referred to old medical records that had been altered in the same way years earlier. Grant had laughed that frightened doctors were easier to control than dishonest ones because dishonest men feared punishment, while guilty men punished themselves. Malik understood who he meant. He contacted Serena and agreed to cooperate. But before he turned over the files, he went to see Elias. Malik did not ask for forgiveness. He admitted that he had known Damon's record was protected and had taken money because he feared losing his career. He explained that the illegal blow in the 4th round had not been the first injustice between them. The first had happened 3 years earlier, when Malik chose silence over truth. Elias did not comfort him. He told Malik that regret mattered only when it became more expensive than the lie. Malik turned over everything. The recordings, payment records, and laboratory data were enough for the state commission to announce an emergency public hearing. Damon's title, Grant's management license, Owen's medical conduct, and Elias's alleged interference would all be examined together. The hearing became the largest scandal in the sport that year. On the morning it began, the room was filled with lawyers, reporters, fighters, physicians, and executives. Damon entered slowly, his right hand still lacking full strength. He wore no championship belt. Grant walked beside him, speaking constantly, reinforcing the version of events they had agreed to repeat. Elias sat alone at the opposite table. To the public, He still looked like the weakest person in the room. He was 64, unemployed, under investigation, and facing a legal team funded by one of the most powerful management companies in combat sports. But unlike the night Jonah died, Elias was no longer trying to protect his career. He had nothing left for Grant to threaten. The Cross attorneys began by attacking his credibility. They displayed the medical clearance bearing Elias's signature and described Jonah's death in clinical detail. They argued that Elias had been suspended for negligence, had spent decades obsessed with Grant, and had transferred his guilt onto Damon. When Elias was asked whether he had signed the document, he answered truthfully. He had. When asked whether Jonah showed symptoms before the fight, he admitted that he had. When asked whether he had failed to stop him, Elias did not hide behind Grant's pressure or Jonah's desperation. He accepted that fear had influenced his decision, and that he had lived with that failure every day since. The room grew quiet. Grant had expected denial. Denial could be attacked. Excuses could be mocked. But Elias offered neither. He explained that his mistake was the reason he had refused to repeat it with Damon. He had once hoped a dangerous situation would somehow end safely. This time, he had chosen to speak even when every person with power told him to remain silent. The honesty changed the atmosphere. Elias was no longer a man pretending to be innocent. He was a man admitting the worst thing he had ever done and refusing to let that shame be used to kill someone else. Serena testified next. She presented the identification codes showing that Damon's blood sample belonged to another athlete. She showed the altered medical reports, the missing neurological assessments, and the repeated changes made after Owen's initial notes. Each revision moved Damon's condition farther from danger and closer to clearance. Grant's lawyers argued that administrative errors were common. Then Serena displayed the payment linking the clinic assistant to the Cross Management Company. The explanation collapsed. Owen Pike was called. He entered the hearing looking older than he had on fight night. For several minutes, he repeated that Damon had appeared stable enough to compete. Then investigators presented his private records. The pages showed everything. The headaches, the memory loss, the knockout in sparring, the hand tremor, the recommendation for brain imaging. And beside several entries were instructions from Grant demanding that the symptoms be softened or removed. Owen looked toward Grant. Grant did not look back. In that moment, Owen understood he had never been protected. He had only been useful. He admitted that Damon should not have fought. He confirmed that Grant threatened his career when he tried to stop the match between rounds. He also acknowledged that he had prepared the injection after Damon collapsed because Grant wanted the episode described as panic rather than neurological failure. The surgeon who operated on Damon testified that the injection could have worsened his condition by delaying proper diagnosis. He stated clearly that Elias's intervention accelerated emergency treatment and likely saved Damon's life. The silent locker room footage was then played with the full audio. The room heard Elias identifying the seizure, demanding an ambulance, warning about intracranial pressure, and giving emergency responders the information that prepared surgeons before Damon reached the hospital. The image that had made Elias look violent now revealed something else. A frightened old man was not attacking the champion. He was fighting for the champion's life. Damon watched without moving. For the first time, he heard what had happened while his mind was failing. He heard Grant ordering Elias out of the room. He heard Owen hesitate. He heard Elias refuse to leave. The man Damon had humiliated had remained when everyone who depended on Damon's fame was still thinking about the story they would tell. Malik's evidence came next. The commission played recordings from 3 years earlier, showing that Grant knew about prohibited stimulants and arranged for samples to be replaced. Payment records proved Malik's team had accepted money to remain silent. Malik admitted his own role before anyone could expose it for him. He did not claim he had been forced. He acknowledged that fear and ambition had made him part of the corruption. Then the recording shifted to an older conversation. Grant's voice could be heard referring to Jonah Ward's death. He described how the fight had begun before the medical form was completed and how Elias had been persuaded to sign afterward. Grant said the signature gave everyone someone to blame and that Elias's guilt would keep him quiet longer than money ever could. Elias closed his eyes. For 22 years, he had replayed the moment he signed that paper. He had imagined Jonah waiting behind the curtain, trusting his older brother to protect him. He had believed his own weakness had sent Jonah into the cage. Now the truth was undeniable. Jonah had already entered. Grant had not pressured Elias into clearing the fight. He had created the clearance after the decision was made. Elias was still responsible for signing. He was still responsible for surrendering to fear. But he had not opened the door that killed Jonah. Grant had opened it, then placed the key in Elias's hand and convinced him to spend the rest of his life believing it was his. The revelation did not erase the pain. It changed its shape. Grant attempted to dismiss the recording as incomplete and illegally obtained. Investigators then introduced archived event logs confirming that Jonah's fight began 12 minutes before the clearance document was created. The original promoter's financial record showed Grant had received payment for keeping the event running despite the medical objection. The system Grant had trusted to protect him became the system that exposed him. Every altered time, every replaced sample, every edited report, every payment. The paper trail he had manipulated for decades now connected one lie to another until there was nowhere left to hide. Damon was called to testify. Grant leaned toward him and reminded him that the family had to remain united. He said the organization, the title, and their entire future depended on Damon repeating that he had felt healthy before the fight. Damon looked down at his right hand. It was trembling again. But this time, the movement was not hidden beneath a towel. He thought about the years of headaches, the missing memories, and the fear he had disguised as confidence. He remembered mocking Elias in front of the cameras. He remembered the old man warning that a belt could be won again, while a damaged brain might never recover. Then he looked at Grant and understood that his father had not been protecting his dream. Grant had been protecting an investment. Damon admitted that he had experienced symptoms for months. He confirmed that he forgot which round had ended and failed to recognize his father in the corner. He also confessed that he knew Malik's final defeat had followed an illegal strike, but accepted the victory because losing terrified him more than dishonesty. The room heard the truth from the champion himself. His perfect record did not collapse because he lacked talent. It collapsed because he had allowed fear to decide what kind of man talent would make him. The commission suspended Damon indefinitely and stripped him of the title. Several victories were placed under review, while the match against Malik was changed to a no contest. Sponsors ended their contracts within hours. The image of the undefeated Golden Champion disappeared from advertisements across the city. Grant lost far more. His management license was revoked. His company's accounts were frozen. Prosecutors opened criminal cases involving medical fraud, bribery, evidence tampering, and reckless endangerment. Former fighters came forward with similar stories. Doctors who had once obeyed him began cooperating with investigators. For years, Grant had used careers to force silence. Now every career he had damaged became a witness against him. Owen lost his right to work in professional combat sports. His cooperation reduced the charges he faced, but it did not erase his responsibility. He was required to testify in cases brought by fighters who had competed while injured under his care. Malik returned the money he had accepted and publicly withdrew his claim to Damon's former title. He insisted that another fighter should compete for it, explaining that silence had made him part of the same system he condemned. He later became the first-ranked fighter to allow an independent organization access to his complete neurological records. Elias was cleared of every accusation connected to Damon's collapse. The commission restored his professional standing and formally corrected the findings related to Jonah's death. He was offered a prestigious position overseeing fighter safety. He accepted only one part of the offer. Elias did not want an office above the sport. He wanted a place close enough to hear the truth before promoters could edit it. With settlement money from the lawsuits and support from several former fighters, he created the Jonah Ward Fighter Safety Initiative. The program provided independent neurological examinations, legal protection for athletes pressured to compete, and training for Cutman, coaches, and officials who needed to recognize the signs of brain injury. At the entrance stood Elias's old metal case. The dents Damon had caused were never repaired. Inside were the tools that had been scattered across the locker room floor on the night millions of people laughed. Beside them sat Elias's broken medical identification card and a photograph of Jonah before his final fight. The display did not celebrate Elias as a hero. It reminded every visitor how easily people ignored the person carrying the warning. Damon's recovery lasted far longer than the public expected. He had to relearn fine motor control in his right hand. Simple balance exercises exhausted him. Bright lights triggered headaches. For the first time since childhood, his days were not organized around becoming stronger than another man. Without the title, he did not know who he was. At first, he blamed Elias for exposing the tests and destroying his career. Anger was easier than admitting that Elias had protected the only future Damon still possessed. Months later, Damon watched the full hearing again. He saw himself kicking the medical case. He heard the laughter. Then he watched Elias enter the locker room after being banned and save him despite everything. Damon understood that an apology made in front of cameras would be another performance. So he waited until there were no reporters. He arrived at the Jonah Ward Center carrying the championship belt that had been taken from him. He placed it on a table and tried to offer it to Elias, as though surrendering the symbol could erase what it represented. Elias did not touch it. He explained that the belt had never belonged to him, and neither had Damon's guilt. If Damon wanted to change, he would have to carry the truth without turning it into another spectacle. Damon asked where to begin. Elias gave him no dramatic punishment. He simply placed a medical checklist in front of him and told him to read every symptom aloud. Damon began with headache, confusion, delayed reaction, memory loss, and tremor. They were the same symptoms he had hidden. Over the next year, Damon spoke privately to young fighters about the pressure to conceal injuries. He described how easily courage could be manipulated by people who profited from risk. He admitted that he had cheated, lied, and humiliated the man who saved him. He did not ask audiences to forgive him. He asked them to stop praising fighters for destroying themselves. Some people believed he had changed, others never did. Elias accepted both reactions. Redemption, he understood, was not a verdict another person could announce. It was a pattern of choices made after applause disappeared. 3 years later, a 19-year-old amateur arrived at the center before the first major fight of his career. During the final examination, Elias noticed a slight delay in his pupil response. The fighter complained that it was only a headache and insisted that withdrawing would destroy his chance of being noticed. His coach argued that they had spent too much money to stop. Before Elias answered, Damon stepped forward. He was no longer licensed to compete, though his movement had improved and his speech had returned to normal. He told the young fighter that another opportunity could be earned, another event could be scheduled, and another crowd could learn his name. But the parts of a person damaged inside the skull did not always return because courage demanded it. The fighter looked toward a glass case on the wall. Inside was Damon's former championship belt. Beneath it were the names of athletes who had been allowed to compete while medically unsafe. Jonah Ward's name appeared first. Damon explained that he once believed the belt proved he was invincible. In reality, it had made him easier to control because he feared losing it more than he feared losing himself. The young fighter withdrew. His coach left in anger. Months later, medical imaging revealed a condition that could have become fatal after another impact. Elias watched Damon complete the paperwork and carefully record every detail. The former champion checked the form twice before signing it. For most of his life, Elias had believed the cage was where fighters revealed their strength. He knew better now. Strength could be found in a champion admitting that his victories were corrupted. It could be found in an opponent returning money and exposing his own silence. It could be found in a doctor accepting punishment after years of obedience. And sometimes, strength appeared as an old Cutman standing beside a closed cage, refusing to let another young man enter. Elias never recovered the 22 years stolen by guilt. He never heard Jonah tell him that he was forgiven. Justice could correct a record, punish a criminal, and return a name to the innocent. But it could not resurrect the dead or restore every lost day. What it could do was give pain a purpose. The case Damon once kicked across the floor became the first thing students saw when they entered the safety center. The damaged metal carried no championship logo and no famous signature. It belonged to a man most cameras had once considered unimportant. Yet inside that case had been the hands, knowledge, and courage that saved a champion's life. And that was the truth Grant Cross had never understood. The most valuable person in an arena is not always the fighter beneath the brightest light. Sometimes, it is the quiet man outside the cage who sees what everyone else has been paid to ignore. A championship can be lost and won again. A reputation can rise and collapse overnight. Records can be rewritten, sponsors can disappear, and crowds can turn their love into anger before the arena is empty. But a human life cannot be replaced. Real strength is not measured by how much punishment a fighter can endure. It is measured by whether he has the courage to stop when continuing would turn pride into self-destruction. And real loyalty is not helping someone protect a lie. It is being willing to lose their approval in order to keep them alive. If you believe no championship is worth a human life, share this story. And tell us honestly, after everything Damon did, would you have given him a second chance? Before anyone knew his name, a soaked stranger walked into the restaurant looking like he might not survive another minute.
Do not let him near the tables.
Then his strength faded in the middle of lunch, and the room treated his need like something shameful to avoid. Only Naomi moved toward him, not because she was fearless, but because everyone else had chosen distance.
Somebody call emergency services now.
Naomi saw a human being where everyone else saw trouble, dirt, danger, or an interruption to their lunch.
Please, I'm sorry.
Kendra Blythe did not ask whether the man was breathing. She only saw him as a stain on her restaurant.
Stand up before you make this place look filthy.
Naomi had almost nothing left, but she spent her last money, so the stranger would not reach the hospital hungry.
Compassion is not in your job description. Take off the apron. You are done here. Use the back door. Even let her leave through the front door.
She sent Naomi into the rain like shame belonged to her. The customers who had watched Naomi kneel beside a dying man now watched her lose her job for it. Some looked away. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked relieved that the punishment had not landed on them. Only one person tried to follow her. A busboy named Isaiah, barely 19, took 2 steps forward before Kendra's stare pinned him back in place. He had 2 younger sisters and a mother on disability. Fear did what cruelty always depends on it to do. Naomi left with her apron folded in her hands, her final tip still trapped in Kendra's locked drawer, and rain soaking through her shoes by the time she reached the bus stop. That night, she told her Aunt Lottie only part of the truth. Lottie Reed was 68, though illness had aged her unevenly. Some mornings, she remembered entire hymns from childhood and the smell of Naomi's mother's perfume. Other mornings, she forgot the word for window. A stroke 3 years earlier had weakened her left side, and a slow fog had settled over her memory after that, arriving in patches that came and went without warning. Naomi had moved into the little apartment on Anson Street to care for her after Naomi's mother died of heart failure, because there had been no one else willing and no money for proper help. Naomi had once been on a different path. At 18, she had graduated near the top of her class, with a scholarship letter from a nursing program folded in a Bible on her mother's dresser. Teachers had called her steady. Counselors had called her promising. Her mother had called her the one who would break the cycle. But cycles do not break just because a letter says congratulations. Sometimes they tighten. Sometimes a hospital bill arrives. Sometimes a caregiver is needed more urgently than a dreamer. So Naomi traded lecture halls for double shifts, textbooks for order pads, and a future with clean white shoes for work shoes that pinched until her toes went numb. She did not regret caring for Lottie. Love was not the problem. The problem was that love did not pay rent, did not refill prescriptions, did not stop landlords from taping notices to doors. The problem was that people praised sacrifice from a distance, then punished the person making it for being tired. By dawn, after the longest night of her life, Naomi had calculated everything and found no answer. Without the diner, she had no paycheck. Without the paycheck, she had no rent. Without rent, Lottie could lose the only home she recognized. Naomi had prayed. but even prayer felt like it had to squeeze through a ceiling crowded with other desperate voices. Then the envelope came. It did not arrive in the mail. It did not come with a knock. It slid silently under the door just before sunrise, a pale blue rectangle against the scratched wooden floor. Naomi stared at it for several seconds before standing. Her first thought was that it might be another notice from the landlord. Her second was that she no longer had room in her chest for one more bad thing. The envelope had her name written across the front in dark ink, not printed. Written, Naomi Reed. The letters were careful, almost old-fashioned. There was no return address, only a small embossed mark in the corner, a lantern surrounded by 3 waves. Inside was not money. That almost disappointed her before she could stop herself. Inside was a single card, thick and expensive, with an address on East Bay Street and a request for her presence that morning at 9. Beneath the address was a line that made Naomi sit down before her knees could make the decision for her. It said that her act at the Mariners' table had not gone unseen. That was all. No explanation. No signature she recognized. Just that sentence, sitting in her lap like a match struck in a dark room. Naomi almost threw it away. People in trouble learn caution. Miracles, when they appear too suddenly, often come with hidden hooks. But the address belonged to the old Peabody House, a restored building near the harbor that Naomi knew only from passing it on the bus. It had once been a shipping office. Now, according to the brass plaque she had seen from the sidewalk, it belonged to something called the Lantern Harbor Foundation. She searched the name on her cracked phone. The screen loaded slowly, then showed a website full of polished photographs, food programs, mobile clinics, emergency shelters, legal aid, hurricane relief. The foundation had been started decades earlier by a shipping family that had turned old warehouse money into charity. Its current chair was a woman named Celeste Vane, known in Charleston for giving away money with one hand and guarding her privacy with the other. Naomi did not understand what any of it had to do with her. Still, at 8:30, after making sure Lottie had breakfast and leaving the neighbor with a number to call in case of trouble, Naomi put on her cleanest blouse, brushed lint from her coat, and took the bus toward East Bay Street. She carried the blue envelope in her bag like evidence in a trial no one had explained. The Peabody House looked even larger up close. Its windows were tall and arched, its brick washed clean by rain, its front steps flanked by planters full of white flowers that looked too expensive to touch. Naomi paused at the bottom step, suddenly aware of her shoes, her tired eyes, and the faint smell of diner grease still caught in her hair, no matter how carefully she had washed it. A security guard opened the door before she reached it. He did not ask whether she belonged. He said her name with respect and guided her inside. That unsettled her, more than suspicion would have. The lobby was warm and quiet. Not rich in the loud way of chandeliers and marble meant to impress, but in the deep, quiet way of places built by people who expect the world to move aside. Oil paintings lined the walls. A long table held brochures about flood relief and food access. Near the back, through a set of open doors, Naomi saw a conference room where 3 people stood waiting. One was Celeste Vane. She was in her 70s, silver-haired, straight-backed, and smaller than Naomi expected. Her face held the calm of someone who had survived more than her portrait suggested. Beside her stood a lawyer with a leather folder, and near the window, wrapped in a clean sweater, thinner but alive, was the man from the diner. Naomi stopped breathing for a moment. The man looked different without rainwater dripping from his coat. His beard had been trimmed. His skin still carried the grayness of recovery, but his eyes were clear. He was not polished. He was not suddenly transformed into someone untouched by pain, but he was alive. And when he saw Naomi, the shame in his expression changed into something more fragile and more difficult to bear: gratitude. Celeste Vane did not begin with grand speeches. She explained gently that the man Naomi had helped was named Adrian Vane, her only son. He had not been missing in the way newspapers like to describe missing heirs. His story was messier, more human, and far less convenient for gossip. Years earlier, after the death of his wife and little daughter in a highway accident, Adrian had withdrawn from the world he once helped serve. Grief had taken the shape of silence, then isolation, then a long wandering that no family money could easily fix. He had refused interviews, refused board meetings, refused even the name that tied him to wealth. For months, he had been living between shelters, ferry terminals, and hospital waiting rooms, convinced that the comfort of his family was something he no longer deserved. The Foundation had searched for him quietly. Too much publicity could have turned his suffering into entertainment. Too much pressure could have driven him farther away. On the day Naomi found him, Adrian had been trying to reach the Foundation office on foot after losing his medication and his wallet during a storm. He had made it only as far as the mariner's table. Every person in that restaurant had seen a problem. Naomi had seen a person. Celeste made sure Naomi understood that this difference had likely saved Adrian's life. The emergency physician had said another hour in the cold rain, with his blood sugar collapsing and his body weakened, might have ended very differently. The meal Naomi paid for had arrived with the paramedics' paperwork and had become the detail that made everyone at the hospital talk, not because of its cost, but because of what it cost Naomi. Naomi felt heat rise behind her eyes. She tried to say that anyone would have done the same, but even as the thought formed, she knew it was not true. Everyone had been there. Everyone had seen him. Most had chosen distance. Celeste then did something Naomi did not expect. She did not offer a reward in the crude way people sometimes pay for conscience, as if kindness were a lost wallet returned for a fee. Instead, she asked Naomi about her life, not with pity, not with the polished curiosity of donors touring poverty for an afternoon. She asked as if Naomi's answers mattered. Naomi did not tell everything at first. Pride has its own survival instinct. But Celeste had spent decades listening to people who were tired of needing help, and she knew how to wait. Slowly, Naomi told her about Lottie, the unpaid rent, the nursing scholarship that had expired, the diner job, and the way Kendra had dismissed her in front of a room full of witnesses. She left out the most humiliating details until Adrian, from beside the window, lowered his head as though each one had landed on him personally. By the end of the meeting, Naomi's life had changed in ways she could not immediately absorb. The Lantern Harbor Foundation offered her a position coordinating a new community meals program called Harbor Hands, which would partner with local restaurants to create emergency meal vouchers for people in crisis. The salary was more than double what she had made at the diner. The benefits included home care support that could help with Lottie's medical needs. The foundation's housing attorney would contact Naomi's landlord that afternoon to stop the eviction and settle the arrears from a hardship fund, not as charity tossed from above, but as stabilization for a caregiver who had been carrying too much alone. Naomi listened with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She had expected, at most, a thank you note. Perhaps a small check. Perhaps nothing she could rely on. She had not expected an opening. She had not expected someone to look at her years of sacrifice and see qualifications instead of weakness. Celeste explained that the foundation did not need someone who merely understood policy. It needed someone who understood hunger without making hungry people feel small. It needed someone who knew the difference between feeding a person and humiliating them. It needed someone who had proven, under pressure, that human dignity mattered even when it was inconvenient. Naomi accepted. But stories like Naomi's do not end the moment good news arrives. In real life, blessings often disturb the people who benefited from your struggle. And Kendra Blythe had built too much of her little kingdom on Naomi, staying silent, poor, and disposable to accept Naomi's rise quietly. At first, Kendra only heard rumors. A delivery driver mentioned that the waitress she had fired had been seen entering the Peabody house. A former customer called the restaurant, asking whether it was true that the woman who helped the collapsed man now worked for the Lantern Harbor Foundation. Isaiah, trying and failing to hide his smile, told another server that Naomi's rent had been handled and her aunt would get medical support. By closing time, Kendra was no longer angry. She was afraid. Fear is different in people who are used to having power. It does not make them humble. It makes them dangerous. Kendra knew things the staff did not. She knew that for nearly 2 years, she had been skimming from the cash drawer in small amounts that looked like counting errors. She knew she had been marking donated community meals as served, then pocketing the reimbursement money when the owner was away. She knew she had refused hungry people at the door while reporting that the restaurant had participated in local relief efforts. She knew the jar labeled "Storm Meal Fund" had been emptied by her hand more than once. Its coins and bills treated as a private bonus for the trouble of pretending to care. She also knew Naomi had noticed irregularities. Naomi had never accused her. Naomi had been too busy surviving, but she had asked questions. She had once wondered why a church group's prepaid meal vouchers were missing from the drawer. She had once found a voided receipt under the printer with Kendra's manager code on it. She had once given a free bowl of gumbo to a veteran after Kendra claimed the voucher program had ended, only for Naomi to discover the next week that the program was still active. At the time, Kendra had dismissed the questions as confusion. Now she saw them as threats. By the next morning, Kendra had created a new story. According to her, Naomi had not been fired for helping a stranger. Naomi had been fired after an internal review suggested she had stolen money from the register and used a medical emergency to distract from it. Kendra did not make the accusation loudly at first. She was too strategic. She let it leak in pieces, through staff whispers, through a carefully worded email to the restaurant owner, through a complaint sent to the Lantern Harbor Foundation's general inbox. The complaint claimed that Naomi Reed was dishonest, unstable, and unfit to handle charitable funds. To make the lie look official, Kendra pressured Isaiah to sign a witness note stating that he had seen Naomi near the drawer before cash went missing. Isaiah refused at first. He said he had seen nothing like that. But Kendra knew his schedule, his family situation, and his fear of losing the only job close enough to home. She cut his hours in half for 1 week, then returned them with a warning hidden behind a smile. By the second week, Isaiah signed a statement he hated himself for signing. Kendra also convinced a prep cook named Marisol to say Naomi had been upset about money. That part was technically true, which made the lie harder to fight. Naomi had been upset about money because poverty had been pressing its knee against her chest for years. Kendra twisted that human truth into motive. When the foundation received the complaint, they did what responsible organizations must do. They placed Naomi on temporary administrative leave while the matter was reviewed. Celeste herself called Naomi and made it clear that leave was not judgment, but process. Still, the word leave felt like a door closing. Naomi had held her new job for only 11 days. The apartment that had begun to feel safe became heavy again. Lottie sensed Naomi's sadness even through the fog of her memory. Some evenings, she reached for Naomi's hand without knowing exactly why. Naomi tried not to cry in front of her. She had cried enough into dishwater, enough into bus windows, enough silently behind the walk-in freezer at the diner. She was tired of tears that changed nothing. What hurt most was not even the risk of losing the job. It was the precision of the lie. Kendra had chosen the accusation that would wound Naomi deepest because Naomi had spent her whole life guarding her integrity. Poor people learned that one mistake can become their whole identity. In the mouths of people looking for reasons to dismiss them, Naomi had always kept receipts, counted change twice, returned overpayments, corrected tips when customers wrote too much by accident. She knew how quickly a black woman in a service uniform could be called dishonest by someone whose own theft wore perfume and a manager badge. For 3 days, Naomi heard nothing. During those 3 days, Kendra enjoyed herself. She moved through the mariner's table with renewed sharpness, telling staff that consequences were finally catching up with people who played saint for attention. She pretended not to care when customers asked about Naomi, then made sure they received a version of events muddy enough to stain her. She even printed a new policy about employee conduct during emergencies, as if compassion had been a workplace hazard. But lies require maintenance. Truth can sit quietly and wait. The first crack came from Isaiah. Guilt can make a room feel too small. Isaiah stopped sleeping. He replayed the moment Naomi knelt beside Adrian, the way she had held his hand without flinching, the way everyone else, including him, had stood back. He replayed the moment Kendra pushed the witness note toward him and reminded him how many people wanted his job. He thought about his sisters, yes, but he also thought about what kind of man he was becoming if fear could make him harm the one person who had always treated him like he mattered. On the 4th morning, Isaiah went to the foundation office before his shift. He arrived shaking harder than Adrian had shaken in the diner, carrying a folded copy of the statement he had signed. He told the foundation's review attorney that it was false. He admitted Kendra had pressured him. He admitted he had never seen Naomi steal anything. He admitted something else too. For months, he had watched Kendra remove cash from the store meal fund jar and replace donation vouchers with blank slips. That confession did not clear Naomi immediately, but it shifted the room. The second crack came from Marisol. She had been quiet for years because she needed work, and because Kendra had a way of making every immigrant employee feel one document away from disaster, whether that was true or not. Marisol had signed nothing, but she had allowed Kendra to use her name in the complaint. When she learned Isaiah had gone to the foundation, she did not want him standing alone. She brought what Kendra had forgotten existed: photographs. Months earlier, Marisol had photographed several prep lists and reimbursement sheets because Kendra kept blaming kitchen staff for missing voucher meals. At the time, Marisol had only wanted proof that the kitchen had prepared what it was told to prepare. But the photos showed a pattern. On days when the restaurant claimed to have served 20 donated meals, the kitchen had prepared 6. On days when reimbursement forms showed full distribution, staff meal logs showed no matching plates. Several forms had Kendra's manager code. Some had Naomi's initials forged badly enough that anyone who knew her handwriting could see the insult. The third crack came from Adrian. Recovery had not made him suddenly powerful in the way people imagine wealth fixes everything. He was still grieving. He still moved carefully through rooms. He still carried guilt like a second spine. But he had one thing Kendra had not counted on: memory sharpened by humiliation. Adrian remembered the man in the navy suit recording him when he fell. He remembered the angle of the phone. He remembered the table. He remembered the woman at the register who had complained about the interruption while filming half the room. The Foundation's attorney tracked the video after a younger staff member found a clipped version online, posted without context, under a caption mocking the stranger on the floor. The internet, for all its cruelty, sometimes preserves what liars hope will disappear. The clipped version showed Naomi kneeling. It showed customers backing away. It showed Kendra standing with folded arms. But it did not show the register clearly. The Foundation needed more. The restaurant's internal cameras, according to Kendra, had malfunctioned that day. The owner, Mr. Harlan Cho, was told the system had overwritten the footage. That should have ended the matter. It did not. Mr. Cho had inherited the mariner's table from his father, who had opened it after serving as a Navy cook. Harlan was not a cruel man, but he was an absent one. And absence in leadership often becomes permission for someone worse to take over. He had trusted Kendra because she kept the restaurant profitable and problems quiet. He had ignored small complaints because he was tired, overextended, and grieving his own divorce. When the Lantern Harbor Foundation contacted him directly, he expected a misunderstanding. Instead, he discovered that his security system had not failed. Kendra had disabled the local storage, but she had forgotten about the backup connected to the insurance provider after a break-in the previous year. The footage wasn't on the restaurant computer. It was in a secure archive she did not know how to erase. Harlan watched it alone first. He watched Naomi serving tables during the rush. He watched Adrian enter, soaked and unsteady. He watched the room recoil. He watched Naomi kneel while Kendra stood back. He watched Naomi ask for emergency help. He watched her pay at the register with her own debit card, not remove money from it. He watched Kendra take Naomi's apron and send her out the side door. Then Harlan kept watching. The archive held more than that day. It held weeks. It held Kendra opening the donation jar after closing. It held her removing envelopes from the voucher drawer. It held her entering manager codes during cash outs, voiding meals that had been paid for by community partners, and slipping bills into the side pocket of her blazer. It held her handing Isaiah the witness note in the storage hallway, pointing toward the schedule board, and making the threat clear even without audio. The truth had not needed to shout. It had needed someone to look. When Naomi was called back to the Foundation office, she expected another question, another form, another polite expression from people deciding whether to believe her. Instead, she found Celeste, Adrian, Harlan Cho, Isaiah, Marisol, and the Foundation attorney seated around the same conference table where hope had first begun to feel possible. Naomi stood at the doorway, uncertain whether she had entered a trial or a rescue. Celeste did not make her wait. She explained that the accusations had been withdrawn, disproven, and referred for further action. Harlan apologized, with a face so pale It seemed the shame had drained him. He admitted that his trust in Kendra had allowed harm to grow under his roof. Isaiah cried before he could finish his apology. Marisol kept her eyes lowered until Naomi crossed the room and touched her shoulder. Not because Naomi owed anyone comfort, but because she understood what fear could do to good people trapped under bad authority. Adrian said the least, but his presence said enough. He had been the man on the floor. Now he was one of the reasons the truth was standing. Naomi was cleared fully. Her leave was ended. Her name was restored. But restoration, for someone who has been publicly humiliated, is not simply a letter saying the matter is closed. A lie travels through people. It enters rooms before you do. It sits in the air, waiting to see whether you will defend yourself or shrink. Celeste understood that. So did Harlan. The Mariners' table held a staff meeting the following Monday before opening. This time, Naomi did not enter through the side door. She entered through the front. The same bell rang above her head, bright and careless, just as it had the day Adrian collapsed. But the room felt different now. The chairs were stacked on tables. The floor smelled of lemon cleaner. The staff stood near the counter, tense and quiet. Kendra was there too, though no longer behind the host stand. Her makeup was perfect, but her face had lost the confidence that once made people step aside. Harlan spoke first, not with the polished language of corporate apologies, but with the rough honesty of a man who had finally looked at what his neglect had cost. He told the staff that Naomi Reed had been wrongfully fired, falsely accused, and publicly mistreated for doing what every decent person in that room should have done. He confirmed that Kendra Blythe had been terminated for cause, and that evidence of theft, intimidation, falsification of records, and charity fraud had been turned over to the proper authorities. Kendra tried to hold herself stiff, as if posture could substitute for innocence. But there are moments when a person's own silence becomes a confession. She had spent years making others feel small under fluorescent lights. Now she stood under the same lights, while the room learned what she had done. The poetic justice was not loud, it was precise. Kendra had fired Naomi for feeding a hungry stranger, and now the theft that destroyed her reputation came from money meant to feed hungry strangers. She had accused Naomi of stealing from a register, and the register logs exposed her. She had used employees' fear to create false statements, and those same employees became the witnesses who helped undo her. She had sent Naomi through the side door in shame, and Naomi returned through the front, while Kendra left, escorted by the owner she had deceived. No one applauded. It was better that way. Applause might have made it feel like a performance. This was not a performance. It was accountability. Kendra's downfall did not end at the sidewalk. Investigators later found that the stolen voucher funds were larger than anyone first believed. Several small churches had paid the Mariners' table in advance to provide hot meals during storms, believing their donations had reached people who needed them. Some had not. A veterans group had sponsored meal cards that were quietly canceled in the system. A neighborhood relief fund had been billed for plates never served. Kendra had not merely stolen cash. She had stolen trust from people who gave what little they had to help others. The charges that followed did not make Naomi happy. She was not the kind of person who found joy in someone else's ruin. But she did feel something steadier than happiness. She felt the weight of a foot lifting from her neck. She felt the world, for once, refusing to ask the wounded person to be the only one who pays. Kendra tried to find another management job, But Charleston is smaller than pride imagines. People talk. Records travel. References matter. The same polished confidence that once opened doors now raised questions she could not answer. For the first time in years, Kendra had to live without the protection of a title and without people beneath her to blame. Naomi returned to the Lantern Harbor Foundation the next day, not as a woman rescued by luck, but as someone beginning the work she had been preparing for her whole life without knowing it. Harbor Hand started small. At first, it was only a list of 5 restaurants willing to keep emergency meal cards behind the counter. The cards were simple, with no public label that could embarrass the person using them. A church, a shelter nurse, a bus driver, or a school counselor could request one. The meal would be served without questions, without a speech, without making hunger prove itself worthy. Naomi insisted on that. Hunger had already humiliated people enough. She built the program from memory as much as training. She remembered the mother counting coins under the table. She remembered the veteran turned away over a missing voucher. She remembered Adrian's hand trembling on a cold tile floor while strangers measured whether he deserved to be touched. She remembered all the people she had served at the Mariners' table who were one bad week away from becoming invisible. Her first major policy was called the warm seat rule. Any participating restaurant that accepted foundation funds had to agree that a person in crisis could sit inside safely while waiting for help, even if they could not order immediately. No one would be forced back into rain because discomfort was bad for business. No one would be treated like a threat for needing warmth. Some restaurant owners resisted. They worried about image, customer complaints, and liability. Naomi listened. Then she told them, calmly and without accusation, that a business afraid of being seen helping hungry people was not actually afraid of liability. It was afraid of being reminded what community means. A surprising number signed after that. The Mariners' table became one of the first official partners. Harlan Cho did more than sign. He changed the restaurant. He installed transparent accounting for every donated meal. He created a staff emergency fund. He hired an outside manager with nonprofit experience. He raised wages modestly but meaningfully, because guilt without structural change is only emotion wearing a better suit. He also placed a small brass plaque near the entrance, not with Naomi's face or a dramatic version of the story, but with a simple line that said every person who entered hungry deserved to leave treated as human. Naomi did not ask for the plaque. At first, she did not even like it. She worried it made her one act of kindness seem exceptional when she believed it should have been ordinary. But Celeste told her that reminders were necessary because decency often disappears not from one grand act of evil, but from 100 small permissions to look away. Adrian slowly returned to himself, though not to the man he had been before tragedy. Some losses do not give back the original version of a person. They make something quieter, deeper, sometimes more compassionate, sometimes more fragile. He began volunteering with Harbor Hands, first behind the scenes, reviewing supply lists and helping design intake forms that did not shame people. Later, he trained with peer support counselors to work with people in grief, addiction recovery, and housing instability. He did not pretend his family name had saved him. In fact, he understood more clearly than anyone that it almost had not. Money had searched for him, but a waitress with $38 had reached him first. That truth changed him. His relationship with Celeste healed slowly. Mother and son had spent years separated by grief, guilt, and all the words each feared would injure the other. Naomi never intruded on that healing. She only noticed, over months, that Adrian stopped standing near exits during meetings. Celeste stopped looking at him as if he might vanish if she blinked. One afternoon, Naomi saw them walk together along the harbor after a fundraiser, not speaking much, simply sharing space. Sometimes that is what forgiveness looks like before it has language. At home, life changed too. The foundation helped Naomi and Lottie move from the drafty apartment on Anson Street into a small but bright unit near a park, with an elevator, reliable heat, and a window where Lottie could watch children chasing pigeons in the afternoon. The first night there, Lottie became agitated because the walls did not feel familiar. Naomi sat with her until the fear passed, describing each room softly, grounding her in the names of things. The next morning, Lottie woke and said the sunlight looked kind. Naomi cried in the kitchen where no one could see. For years, she had measured success and avoided disasters. Rent not late enough to evict, medicine not empty enough to panic, electricity not shut off yet, shoes not broken beyond repair. Now she had space to imagine a life not built entirely around emergencies. She enrolled in evening courses toward a community health certification, not because she needed a title to prove her worth, but because the dream she had buried at 18 still had roots. The scholarship letter from long ago remained in her Bible, creased and yellowing. She did not look at it with grief anymore. She looked at it like evidence that the girl she had been was still somewhere inside the woman she had become, not lost, only waiting. Months passed, and Harbor Hands grew. What began with 5 restaurants became 15, then 28. A mobile meal van joined the program after hurricane season, exposed neighborhoods where older residents could not reach distribution sites. School counselors started calling when students came to class, hungry after weekends. Hospital social workers requested meal cards for discharged patients who had nowhere stable to go. Bus drivers carried small information cards because they were often the first to see who was sleeping where the city pretended not to look. Naomi worked harder than she ever had at the diner, but the work no longer shrank her. There is a difference between exhaustion that empties you and exhaustion that has meaning. She still had difficult days. She still dealt with budgets, skeptical donors, broken supply chains, and people who assumed compassion could be scheduled neatly between office hours. But she also saw men who had been ignored sit down to hot stew without being watched like criminals. She saw mothers receive grocery boxes before shame could force them to choose between pride and dinner. She saw restaurant workers begin to understand that dignity was not extra service, it was the meal. The story of Naomi's firing eventually reached local news, though Celeste did everything possible to keep it from turning into spectacle. Reporters wanted a clean headline: "Poor waitress saves rich heir. Villain manager exposed. Charity triumphs." But life is rarely that clean. Naomi agreed to one interview only after insisting that the focus remain on food insecurity and worker vulnerability, not on turning her into a saint. She was not a saint. She was a woman who had been tired, broke, and scared, and had still chosen to kneel. That distinction mattered. Saints are easy to admire because people imagine they are different from the rest of us. A tired woman choosing mercy with overdue bills in her pocket is much harder to ignore because she removes the excuse that kindness belongs only to people with spare time, spare money, or spotless lives. The interview aired on a Sunday evening. Naomi watched it with Lottie, who understood pieces of it. At one point, Lottie touched the screen when Naomi appeared, then looked at the real Naomi sitting beside her and smiled with sudden recognition. For one clear moment, the fog lifted enough for pride to pass through. Lottie remembered Naomi's mother then. She remembered the hospital. She remembered the little girl who used to line up dolls and pretend to check their temperatures. She remembered enough to tell Naomi, in her own wandering way, that her mother would have been proud. Naomi held that sentence for days. But the most important moment in Naomi's new life did not happen on television. It happened almost 1 year after the firing, on another rainy Tuesday afternoon, at the reopened Mariner's Table. The restaurant was hosting the launch of an expanded Harbor Hands partnership. There were donors, city officials, restaurant workers, shelter coordinators, and a few regular customers who remembered the old days with uncomfortable clarity. The event could have become polished and empty, the kind of gathering where people discuss hunger over catered trays. Naomi refused to let that happen. Instead of speeches first, she asked everyone to sit for a meal served family style. No VIP table, no reserved corner for donors, no separation between people with checks and people with lived experience. Adrian helped serve. Harlan cleared plates. Celeste sat beside a former shelter resident who now worked as a peer navigator. The room, once divided by fear and judgment, felt almost unfamiliar in its warmth. Near the end, Naomi stood where Kendra had once fired her. She did not describe Kendra with hatred. She did not need to. Hatred would have made Kendra too central to a story that had grown beyond her. Naomi spoke instead about the floor, the actual floor of the restaurant, the tile near table 6 where Adrian had collapsed. She said that every community has a floor like that, a place where someone falls and everyone else must decide what kind of person they are. Some step back, some record, some complain about the inconvenience, and sometimes one person kneels, not because they are fearless, but because they know what it feels like to need someone. She explained that Harbor Hands existed to make kneeling less lonely. It existed so mercy would not depend on one waitress risking her job or one stranger being connected to a powerful family. It existed because people should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. That line stayed with everyone. People should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. Adrian lowered his eyes when she said it. Celeste reached for his hand. Harlan looked toward the doorway, perhaps remembering all the people his restaurant had once allowed to be turned away. Isaiah, now promoted and studying hospitality management with foundation support, wiped his face quickly and pretended he had not. Marisol smiled openly, no longer afraid of being seen. After the event, when the room had emptied and rain softened the windows, Naomi stood for a moment by table 6. The tile had been repaired, where a crack once ran through it. Most people would never know anything had happened there. That seemed right to her. Sacred places do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they hide under ordinary tables in ordinary diners, waiting for ordinary people to make choices that echo farther than they can see. Naomi thought about the blue envelope that had slid under her door before dawn. For a long time, she had believed that envelope was the beginning of her rescue. Now she understood it differently. The rescue had begun earlier, on the floor, when she refused to let the room decide a man's value for her. The envelope had only carried the news that kindness, though delayed, had found its way back. And yet, she also knew kindness did not always return with a foundation job, a new apartment, or public vindication. Sometimes kindness returns quietly. Sometimes it returns years later, through a child who remembers being fed. Sometimes it returns only as the knowledge that you did not become cruel when cruelty would have been easier. That kind of return is harder to measure, but it is real. Naomi kept the blue envelope. She framed it in her office, not because of the address or the embossed lantern, but because of the sentence inside. Her act had not gone unseen. On difficult days, when funding was short or the need felt endless, she looked at that sentence and thought of all the unseen acts happening across the city. A cashier slipping a sandwich into a bag, a bus driver waiting an extra minute for an elderly passenger, a teacher sending food home without making a child explain, a nurse warming a blanket for someone no family had come to visit, a neighbor knocking on a door before the silence became permanent. The world is held together by people who do small mercies without witnesses. But Naomi also learned that mercy must become more than a moment. It must become policy. It must become systems. It must become wages, shelters, meal programs, honest records, and leaders who do not leave vulnerable workers at the mercy of petty tyrants. One good person can save a life. A good community can stop that life from falling so far in the first place. Years later, when people asked Naomi why she helped Adrian that day, they expected a dramatic answer. They expected her to say she sensed he was important, or that fate whispered to her, or that she had some grand vision of what would follow. She always disappointed them gently. She explained that she had no idea who he was. She did not see a foundation heir, a lost son, or a future partner in a citywide program. She saw a man on the floor. That was enough. And maybe that is the part of the story worth carrying with us. Not the envelope, not the money, not the downfall of a cruel manager, satisfying as justice may be. The heart of the story is the moment before reward exists, before witnesses understand, before the world claps, before anyone promises that goodness will be repaid. It is the moment when helping costs something. Naomi lost her job in that moment. She spent the last of her money in that moment. She was humiliated in that moment, but she kept something Kendra could never steal, even with false statements and forged records. She kept the kind of dignity that does not depend on a title. She kept the kind of courage that survives poverty, grief, and exhaustion. She kept the part of herself that still believed a stranger's life was worth bending down for. Kendra, in the end, lost everything she had tried to protect by refusing to bend. She protected the restaurant's image and destroyed her own. She guarded the cash drawer and exposed her theft. She treated compassion as weakness and discovered too late that compassion had witnesses stronger than fear. That is how justice sometimes works. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but with a patience that follows every hidden thing to its door. So the next time you see someone fall, maybe not on a restaurant floor, maybe not in a way anyone else can see, remember Naomi Reed. Remember the room that stepped back. Remember the woman who knelt. Remember that a person does not become worthy of kindness because they are secretly rich, secretly connected, or secretly important. They are worthy because they are human. And if you believe the world still needs people who choose mercy when no one is clapping, carry that belief into the next ordinary moment. Because somewhere, in a diner, on a bus, in a hospital hallway, under a leaking roof, someone is waiting to find out whether the room will turn away or whether one person will remember what humanity is supposed to look like. The woman in the faded raincoat counted her coins twice before placing them on the marble counter.
Are you sure you can afford anything in here?
To the two cashiers behind the counter, she looked like a problem that had walked in wearing cheap clothes.
She looks like she came in from the alley.
They made her wait, served customers who came after her, and gave her the oldest croissant in the display case. Eleanor took the paper bag without complaint and sat at the small table near the trash station.
Some people don't understand where they belong.
As she bit into the dry croissant, the company's slogan did not feel like a promise anymore.
So this is what warmth became.
Then she heard the cashiers talking.
Careless because they believed no one important was listening. People like that ruin the whole atmosphere.
They spoke of certain customers as if they were stains on the atmosphere.
We should put her on the list before she comes back.
They had created a quiet system for making certain customers feel unwelcome enough to stop returning.
The wrong people need a little push out the door.
Older man entered wearing a navy cap and holding a small wallet in both hands.
Not him again.
He counted coins, carefully apologizing with his posture before anyone even asked him to.
This is a bakery, not a coin machine.
And that was the moment the woman in the raincoat stopped chewing, because the people behind the counter had no idea who she really was. The woman in the faded raincoat counted her coins twice before placing them on the marble counter. Her sleeves were damp from the morning rain, her shoes were scuffed at the toes, and the paper grocery bag hanging from her wrist had a small tear near the bottom. To anyone kind, she might have looked tired. To anyone careful, she might have looked like someone who had been carrying more than groceries. But to the two cashiers behind the counter, she looked like a problem that had walked in wearing cheap clothes. They did not know her name. They did not know that the polished bakery around them, from the golden logo on the glass door to the elegant slogan painted across the wall, existed because of her. They did not know that the woman quietly asking for one plain croissant was Eleanor Vale, founder and chief executive of Hearth and Hollow Bakery, a 58-store chain built on the promise that no one should ever be made to feel too poor, too tired, or too ordinary to deserve warmth. They only saw what they wanted to see. A woman who would not tip well. A woman who would not photograph her coffee for social media. A woman who did not belong in the bright little world they believed the flagship store was supposed to represent. So they made her wait. They served 3 customers who came after her. They reminded her of the price before she had even finished ordering. And when she finally placed her coins on the counter, they gave her the oldest croissant in the display case, the one that should have been pulled from sale before sunrise. Eleanor took the paper bag without complaint and sat at the small table near the trash station. It was the table people chose only when every other seat was full, the one beneath the cold draft from the side door. Across the room, painted in cream-colored letters, above a row of polished wooden booths, were the words that had made Hearth and Hollow famous. Warmth belongs to everyone. Those words appeared on every cup, every napkin, every training video, every investor presentation. Customers took photographs beneath them. Managers repeated them at orientation. The marketing team had built entire campaigns around them. But that morning, as Eleanor bit into a dry, stale croissant in the corner of her own flagship bakery, the words did not feel like a promise. They felt like a witness. Then she heard the cashiers talking. At first, it was the usual careless cruelty people use when they think no one important is listening. They laughed about the old man who paid in coins. They mocked delivery riders who asked for water. They complained about nurses coming in after night shifts with tired faces and cheap shoes. They spoke of certain customers as if they were stains on the atmosphere, people who made the bakery look less refined. simply by sitting down. Then one of them mentioned a list. Not a company list, not an official policy. Something they had created themselves, a quiet system for making certain customers feel so unwelcome that they would stop returning. They called it the Velvet List because in their minds, Hearth and Hollow was supposed to feel soft, beautiful, and expensive, and some people, they believed, were not fit to touch velvet. Eleanor did not move. She kept her head lowered beneath the brim of her gray cap and held the croissant like any tired customer trying to disappear into the corner. But every sense in her body had sharpened. Years in boardrooms had taught her how to sit still while people revealed more than they meant to. She had heard lies dressed as strategy, cruelty dressed as standards, and theft dressed as efficiency. But what she heard next made her freeze. One of the cashiers said the night baker needed to be gone before Monday, because if Maya Reyes kept talking, the whole Sunrise honey bun story could fall apart. Maya Reyes. The name had appeared once in a report on Eleanor's desk, buried beneath phrases that had made the issue sound small. A difficult employee, a misunderstanding about credit, a resolved workplace conflict. At the time, Eleanor had almost trusted the summary. Almost. But now, sitting in disguise at a table no one respected, she understood something cold and simple. The reports reaching her office had not been telling the truth. They had been covering it. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to understand what Hearth and Hollow was before it became a brand. Before the 58 stores, before the soft lighting and seasonal pastries, before investors called it a premium community bakery concept. It began with a little girl and her mother standing outside a bakery window on a winter morning, looking at warm bread they could barely afford. Eleanor had been 8 years old then. Her mother had saved coins for 2 days to buy one sweet roll for her birthday. They were poor, but her mother wanted her to have 1 hour that felt special. They entered the bakery with wet shoes and shy smiles. The man behind the counter served them because their money was real enough to take, but he made it clear that they could not sit near the window. He placed them at the little table near the restroom, beside the mop bucket and the draft from the back door. Eleanor remembered the shame more than the taste of the pastry. She remembered her mother pretending not to care. She remembered other customers looking away. Most of all, she remembered realizing that a room could be warm for some people and cold for others, depending on who was allowed to feel welcome. Years later, when she opened the first Hearth and Hollow, she painted her promise on the wall before she even ordered the menu board. Warmth belongs to everyone. It was not branding then. It was not a slogan. It was a vow made to the child she had been, and to the mother who had swallowed humiliation so her daughter could have one birthday pastry. The first store was small and imperfect. The chairs did not match. The counter had scratches. The original tip jar was an old blue ceramic jar painted with a little lighthouse. Eleanor baked before sunrise, served coffee at noon, washed dishes after closing, and learned the names of customers most businesses would have overlooked. A retired bus driver, a mail carrier, a young nurse, a man who sometimes slept in his car, but still insisted on paying for black coffee. Eleanor learned early that a bakery could feed more than hunger. It could tell a person they were still welcome in the world. Then the little store became 3 stores, then 11, then 30, then 58. The logo became cleaner. The chairs matched. The menu became seasonal. The old wooden counter was replaced by stone. The first location was renovated into the company's flagship store, polished until it looked less like a neighborhood bakery and more like a photograph of one. From headquarters, everything looked beautiful. Revenue was up. Customer traffic was strong. The flagship store had become the crown jewel of the company. Social media showed golden pastries, smiling employees, and sunlight falling perfectly over cups of coffee. The regional manager, Victor Harlan, reported that the store was thriving. Victor was calm, polished, and precise, the kind of man who could make any problem sound like a minor adjustment already handled. So when Eleanor first saw the negative reviews and anonymous employee complaints, Victor dismissed them gently. He said growth always made some people uncomfortable. He said high standards could feel unfair to employees who resisted accountability. He said one night, Baker, Maya Reyes, had been especially emotional about ordinary product development decisions. He said the situation had been resolved through coaching. The phrase should have comforted Eleanor. Instead, it stayed with her. A few days later, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a torn strip of apron cloth dusted with flour, a photocopy of a strange tip distribution sheet, and a scrap of parchment paper with one sentence written in blue ink. "Ask who really bakes the sunrise buns." At the bottom was a tiny drawing of a lighthouse. Eleanor stared at that drawing longer than she expected to. It reminded her of the old blue tip jar from the first store, the one that had disappeared during renovation. Something about the envelope felt less like a complaint and more like a final attempt from someone who no longer trusted the official channels. So Eleanor stopped asking for reports. She went to see the truth herself. She bought the faded raincoat from a thrift store 2 neighborhoods away. She wore old shoes, a gray cap, and a delivery tote. She made herself look like someone the world was used to overlooking. Then, just after sunrise, she walked through the glass doors of her own flagship bakery as a stranger. The first thing she noticed was not open cruelty. It was performance. That made it worse. When a well-dressed couple entered ahead of her, Brielle Voss greeted them with a brightness so polished it seemed to sparkle. Brielle was the lead cashier, the face of the morning counter, beautiful in a sharp, curated way, with perfect hair and a smile that turned on instantly for the right kind of customer. Beside her, Kendra Pike laughed softly, offered samples, and made sure the couple knew about the limited edition glaze that had been trending online. Their warmth appeared instantly, like lights switched on for an audience. Then Eleanor stepped forward, and the lights went out. Brielle's eyes moved over the raincoat, the worn tote, the coins in Eleanor's hand. Something in her face hardened just enough for a person who had once been poor to recognize. Kendra became suddenly busy, wiping an already clean counter. The silence lasted just long enough to make Eleanor feel that asking for service was an inconvenience. That was how cruelty survived in places like this. Not always through shouting, not always through insults that could be quoted in a complaint. Sometimes it survived in pauses, glances, slow service, the wrong pastry, the cold seat near the trash, the tiny message that said a person could buy something but still not belong. Eleanor stayed after receiving her croissant. She listened, she watched, and the longer she stayed, the uglier the pattern became. An older man entered wearing a navy cap and holding a small wallet in both hands. His name was Samuel Brooks, though Eleanor did not know it yet. He ordered 1 sunrise honey bun and a small coffee. He counted coins carefully, apologizing with his posture even before anyone asked him to. Brielle's smile thinned. Kendra muttered that some people treated the register like a coin machine. The words were quiet enough to deny, but clear enough to wound. Samuel pretended not to hear. He looked once toward the table by the window, where morning light rested across the wood, then chose a seat closer to the back. Later, Eleanor would learn that Samuel had come to that same store every Friday morning with his wife, June, for 13 years. They had shared one honey bun and 2 coffees at the window table through retirement, illness, and the quiet narrowing of life. After June died, Samuel kept coming alone, not because the bun was just a pastry, but because grief sometimes survives by repeating small acts of love. Brielle and Kendra did not know that, or worse, they did not care. To them, Samuel was simply another low-value customer, another name for the velvet list. Eleanor watched 2 nurses in wrinkled scrubs get told the restroom was for paying customers, even though they had already ordered. She watched a delivery rider wait, while customers who came after him were served first. She watched a construction worker quietly move away from the front seating area after Kendra made a comment about muddy boots, even though the floor was clean. None of these moments was dramatic enough to make the evening news, but together they formed a culture. A polished room where kindness flowed upward and contempt flowed down. Then the cashier spoke of Maya. Maya Reyes, they said, had become a problem. She kept asking about missing tips. She kept claiming ownership over recipes created on company time. She had become protective of a notebook. Victor had promised to handle her before Monday's national launch. Once Maya was gone, no one would be able to prove where the Sunrise honey buns had really come from. Eleanor left without revealing herself. She did not confront Brielle. She did not comfort Samuel in the moment. She did not call Victor from the sidewalk. Powerful people who are warned too early start cleaning before the truth can be preserved. Instead, Eleanor walked 3 blocks in the rain, sat on a bench outside a closed florist, and called Miriam Chen, the company's head of internal audit. Miriam was not dramatic, not easily impressed, and not interested in protecting anyone's comfort from the facts. By the next morning, Eleanor Vale had become Edith Lane, a temporary support worker assigned to the flagship store. Victor approved the staffing request without concern. People like Edith Lane were invisible by design, useful hands, not dangerous eyes. Eleanor returned before dawn, when the bakery had not yet put on its performance. The front lights were dim. The music had not started. The pastry case was still empty. Without customers and curated warmth, the store revealed its bones, racks of trays, flour on the floor, taped labels, tired appliances, and the steady rhythm of people working before anyone was awake enough to thank them. That was where Eleanor truly met Maya Reyes. Maya was not what Victor's report had described. She was not unstable. She was not difficult. She was a woman in her 30s with dark hair tied back, flour on her forearms, and the focused calm of someone who had learned to keep moving because stopping would allow exhaustion to catch her. She worked with quiet attention, not only to the dough, but to the people around her. When Edith struggled with the labeling system, Maya helped her without making her feel foolish. She explained allergy tags, freezer notes, tray timing, and which boxes split if stacked too high. She also placed a warmer pair of gloves near Edith's station, pretending they had simply been left there. That small kindness almost hurt more than the insults had. Cruelty confirmed what Eleanor feared. Kindness showed her what was being wasted. Over the next hours, Eleanor watched Maya hold the store together from the shadows. Maya adjusted oven temperatures before a batch could burn. She corrected an inventory mistake, that would have left the store short by Friday. She softened a citrus glaze that had been mixed too sharply. She prepared a low-sugar honey bun and set it aside with Samuel's name written neatly on the bag. She remembered that one nurse preferred oat milk, but no vanilla. She saved broken pastry ends for the delivery rider, who came in cold after the morning route. None of it showed on a dashboard. None of it appeared in Victor's reports. But without Maya, the flagship store would have been nothing more than expensive lighting around an empty heart. When Brielle and Kendra arrived for the day shift, the room changed. Brielle swept in wearing perfume and confidence, already complaining about flour near the proofing station. Kendra followed with coffee from another shop, which Eleanor noticed immediately because employees were supposed to drink Hearth and Hollow products while on shift. They walked through the bakery as if morning began when they entered, as if the trays, the notes, the warm buns, and the prepared counter had somehow created themselves. Maya handed over the production notes. Brielle barely looked at them. Kendra asked whether the honey buns were finally consistent, a question designed to sound professional while reminding everyone that Maya's work was always on trial. Maya explained that humidity had affected the dough and that she had adjusted the rest time. Later that morning, Eleanor heard Brielle repeat the same detail to Victor over the phone, as if it had been her own observation. Eleanor said nothing, but she remembered. As Edith, she worked several shifts over the next few days. She wiped tables, unpacked deliveries, sorted sleeves, and listened. She learned that the official tip policy and the real tip practice were not the same. On paper, tips were shared among eligible hourly employees based on hours worked. In practice, Brielle and Kendra controlled a second calculation. They called it front weighting. They claimed that the people who shaped the guest experience deserved more. By that, they meant themselves. Night bakers, dish staff, prep workers, and cleaners received whatever remained after the front counter took its invisible cut. Sometimes the theft was cash removed before counting. Sometimes it was digital tips assigned under the wrong shift category. Sometimes it was a handwritten adjustment justified by customer-facing performance. The amounts were small enough to hide in daily noise, but over 14 months, small theft had become real money. For Brielle and Kendra, it meant extra spending money. For the workers they stole from, it meant delayed bills, cheaper groceries, and bus fare counted twice. Maya had noticed. She had filed complaints, but every complaint disappeared into Victor's office and came back labeled as resolved through coaching. The family connection came from a careless sentence. One evening, Kendra complained that Victor always protected Brielle because of family dinners. Brielle snapped at her to be careful where she said things, then reminded her that Victor was not technically her father. The word technically did not erase the truth. Miriam confirmed it the next day. Victor Harlan was married to Brielle's mother. He had supervised Brielle's promotions, closed complaints against her, and never disclosed the conflict of interest. Now the pattern was clear. Brielle was not simply arrogant. She was protected. Kendra was not simply cruel. She was useful to someone protected. And Victor was not simply negligent. He had built a locked gate around the truth. Still, the most important evidence was the notebook. Maya kept it wrapped in parchment and hidden inside an old flour tin in the storage room. Eleanor first saw it when Kendra nearly found it during a closing shift. Papers slid across the floor, and Eleanor helped gather them before anyone else could look too closely. She saw dates, sketches, ingredient ratios, customer notes, and small drawings of lighthouses in the margins. She saw early versions of the sunrise honey buns, notes about clover honey, oven temperature, texture, and how the glaze should catch the light without becoming sticky. She saw a sentence written beside one recipe. Make it taste like morning is forgiving you. That sentence stayed with her. Miriam pulled Victor's national launch presentation that night. In it, Victor described the sunrise honey bun as a signature expression of morning comfort, designed to make morning feel forgiving. The wording was too close to be coincidence, and the dates were worse. Maya's drafts came months before Victor's proposal. He had not stolen only a recipe. He had stolen the language of her heart. The launch was scheduled for Monday. Victor arrived at the flagship on Friday afternoon, wearing a navy coat, polished shoes, and the calm expression of a man visiting property rather than people. The staff changed around him. Brielle became brighter. Kendra became useful. The shift lid stood straighter. Even the store seemed to perform for him. Eleanor kept her head down and wiped tables. Victor praised the pastry case. He complimented Brielle on presentation. He talked about excellence, consistency, and protecting the Hearth and Hollow experience. Every phrase sounded reasonable until Eleanor looked at Maya standing near the back kitchen, listening to her own work being celebrated without her name. Then Victor turned to Maya. His voice stayed smooth, but the room understood smoothness could bruise. He mentioned concerns about attitude. He mentioned intellectual property boundaries. He mentioned the seriousness of keeping company product materials within approved systems. Maya tried to explain, but his authority silenced her before his words did. Brielle watched with satisfaction. Kendra looked relieved. The other employees looked down, not because they believed Victor, but because people who live paycheck to paycheck know the cost of eye contact. Victor announced that Maya would be placed on final review through the weekend. Her access to product development materials would be restricted. Her participation in Monday's launch preparation would be suspended. The official reason would be process compliance. The real reason stood naked in the room. They were taking her work, then punishing her for remembering it was hers. Maya did not cry. That seemed to irritate Brielle more than tears would have. Maya only asked whether she was still expected to complete the night bake before the review began. Even while being humiliated, she thought of the customers who would come in the morning. She thought of the people who had done nothing to her and still deserved something warm. That was when Eleanor understood something important. Maya was not just a talented employee. She was the keeper of the original promise. She was what Hearth and Hollow had been before it became polished enough for people like Victor to exploit. But knowing the truth was not enough. Eleanor needed proof strong enough to survive denials, lawyers, edited memories, and the polished outrage of guilty people caught too late. So she waited. She let Victor believe Monday would belong to him. She let Brielle believe Maya's ending had already been written. She let Kendra keep her little notebook beneath the register. And behind the scenes, Miriam's team gathered everything. They pulled digital tip records and compared them with cash deposits. They found adjustments clustered around Brielle's shifts. They found camera outages during tip counts. They recovered deleted scheduling messages. They traced 6 complaints from Maya, all closed by Victor's office. 1 complaint mentioned tip theft. 1 mentioned customer discrimination. 1 mentioned the velvet list. 1 mentioned that Victor had used Maya's recipe language in a regional report. The final complaint contained almost the same sentence as the anonymous envelope. Ask who really bakes the sunrise buns. All 6 had been buried. Saturday brought the incident that removed any last hesitation. The bakery was busy, the kind of bright morning that made the store look like a commercial. Brielle and Kendra were in full performance for the customers they liked, offering samples and smiling beneath the slogan. Maya worked in the back, officially restricted from product development, but still responsible for keeping the pastry case full, because hypocrisy often depends on the labor of the people it punishes. Samuel came in later than usual, holding his navy cap and a folded photograph in his coat pocket. Eleanor later learned that it was his wedding anniversary. He had spent the morning at the cemetery visiting June. For 13 years, they had marked the day with a honey bun at the window table. He ordered 1 sunrise honey bun and a small coffee. His coins spilled slightly on the counter. Not many, just enough to slow him down. Kendra sighed. Brielle glanced toward the line behind him and suggested with cruel politeness that some customers might be more comfortable taking their orders to go when seating was limited. The window table was empty. Samuel looked at it, then looked down. Then Brielle did something Eleanor would never forget. She took a honey bun from the display, placed it in a bag, then switched it with one from a tray marked for disposal beneath the counter. The movement was quick. Most customers would not have seen it. Eleanor saw it. So did Maya. The bun was not unsafe. It was simply old, flattened, and unworthy of the price he paid. A small theft of dignity wrapped in branded paper. Maya crossed from the kitchen before caution could stop her. She did not accuse Brielle. She did not create a scene. She simply took a fresh bun from the warm tray, placed it in a new bag, and made sure Samuel received that one instead. For one brief second, the bakery became what it was supposed to be. Samuel held the warm bag in both hands. His eyes filled quietly, not with drama, but with the surprise of a person who had braced for humiliation and received gentleness instead. He sat at the window table and placed the worn photograph beside his coffee. In it, a younger Samuel and June smiled over a shared pastry. Maya returned to the back. Brielle's face hardened. The punishment came after the rush. Victor arrived within an hour, which told Eleanor he had been waiting for an excuse. The staff gathered near the back counter. Victor framed the issue as insubordination. He said Maya had interfered with front-of-house service, undermined chain of command, and created confusion during peak volume. Brielle added her version with practiced sadness. Kendra supported every word. Maya stood alone. That was the part Eleanor would remember. Not Victor's lies, not Brielle's cruelty, not Kendra's eagerness. It was the silence of the others. The baker who knew Maya had saved entire shifts. The dishwasher who knew tips had gone missing. The junior cashier who had once cried in the freezer after Brielle mocked her accent. They all knew pieces of the truth, but fear held them still. Eleanor did not judge them easily. She had been poor enough to understand fear. But she also knew that silence is the soil where people like Victor grow strong. Victor told Maya that her employment would be reviewed Monday morning before the launch meeting. Until then, she was to surrender any personal notes related to bakery products, because company policy required product development materials to remain accessible to management. Maya's face changed for the first time. Not panic exactly, but a flash of terror. The notebook, her recipes, her proof. Everything they had taken from her had at least left fingerprints inside those pages. If Victor got the notebook, the last living record of the truth could disappear. Eleanor created a small distraction by knocking over a stack of empty pastry sleeves near the storage door. It was clumsy enough to be believable from an older temp worker. Kendra snapped at her. Brielle rolled her eyes. Victor looked annoyed. For 30 seconds, the room's focus shifted. That was all Maya needed. She slipped into the storage room and came out moments later, with her expression too controlled and her apron pocket slightly heavier. As she passed Edith, her hand brushed Eleanor's sleeve, and something small moved from one pocket to another. Later, in the restroom, Eleanor unfolded the scrap Maya had given her. It was not the whole notebook. It was a single torn page, the first draft of the sunrise honey bun recipe, dated 11 months before Victor's proposal. At the bottom was the lighthouse. Beneath it was one sentence in blue ink. For the people who come in before the world has been kind to them. Eleanor stood in the restroom of her own flagship store, holding proof that the company's most celebrated new product had been born from the heart of a woman they were preparing to erase. By Sunday night, the trap was ready. Not a cruel trap. Eleanor did not believe cruelty could repair cruelty. She believed in truth arranged so carefully that lies had nowhere left to stand. Miriam had the audit files. Legal had the employment records. Human Resources had been instructed to attend Monday's launch meeting without informing Victor why. The board's ethics chair had been quietly briefed. Camera footage had been preserved from cloud backups Brielle thought had failed. The digital tip logs had been matched against deposits. Deleted scheduling messages had been recovered. The anonymous envelope, Maya's torn recipe page, and Victor's presentation were placed in one folder. Still, Eleanor needed one more thing. Maya's notebook had to be protected before Victor could take it. She found Maya after closing, sitting alone on an overturned crate near the dry storage shelves. The ovens had cooled. The bakery lights were low. Without music, customers, or performance, the room felt almost like the first Hearth and Hollow again, back when warmth came from work instead of design. Maya looked exhausted in a way sleep would not fix. Eleanor sat nearby, still wearing Edith's raincoat. For a while, neither of them spoke. Sometimes trust cannot be rushed with questions. Sometimes the most honest thing one person can give another is enough silence to decide whether the truth is safe. Maya eventually explained that she wrote everything down because memory was easy for powerful people to challenge. She wrote down dates because managers changed stories. She sketched lighthouses beside recipes that felt important because her daughter liked lighthouses. Maya had once told her daughter that a lighthouse was proof that even in darkness, someone could choose to keep a light burning for people they might never meet. That was why she had painted one on the tip jar. The tip jar had been her small attempt to make the team feel shared. Back when she still believed shared effort meant shared reward, she brought in an old blue ceramic jar and painted a lighthouse on it after her daughter went to bed. Across the front, she wrote, "For everyone who keeps the light on." For a few weeks, people smiled at it. Then Brielle taped a note over Maya's words, limiting tips to day staff only. No manager removed it. No one wanted conflict. Over time, the paper yellowed at the edges, and unfairness became part of the counter. Maya said she had stopped expecting anyone to fix it. That sentence hurt Eleanor because it named the deepest failure of leadership. Not that wrong had happened. Wrong always finds a way into human systems. The failure was that a good employee had stopped believing the truth had somewhere to go. Eleanor wanted to reveal herself then. She wanted to tell Maya that Monday would not unfold the way Victor expected. But revealing too early might put Maya in a position she had not chosen. So she asked only whether the notebook was safe. Maya looked at her for a long time. Maybe part of her sensed that Edith was not just a temp worker. Maybe she was too tired to name the possibility. But finally, she reached behind a flower bin and removed the wrapped notebook. She did not hand it over immediately. Her fingers tightened around it. Eleanor understood. That notebook was not just evidence. It was Maya's voice in a place that had tried to speak over her. It held late nights, failed batches, customer notes, her daughter's little drawings, and the proof that she had existed as more than labor. Eleanor promised, without revealing everything, that no one who had stolen from her would be allowed to keep deciding what the truth was worth. Maya studied her face. Then slowly, she let the notebook go. Eleanor took it with both hands. Monday morning arrived bright and cold. The flagship store opened early for the regional launch meeting. The pastry case gleamed. The sunrise honey buns sat in perfect rows, brushed with honey until they caught the light like small golden promises. A banner announced the national rollout. Victor had arranged everything carefully. Brielle wore her best smile. Kendra had curled her hair. Maya had been told to report before her review. To everyone in that room, Monday had a script. Victor would praise the launch. Brielle would be recognized for front-of-house excellence. Kendra would stand close enough to share the glow. Maya would be disciplined, possibly fired, and her notebook would disappear into management custody. The national campaign would move forward. The company would sell millions of buns under a story stolen from the woman who woke before dawn to bake them. That was the script they expected. Then Edith Lane walked in. Brielle frowned, irritated that the temp worker had appeared during a high-level meeting. Kendra whispered something under her breath. Victor began to explain that temporary support staff were not needed and that Edith could wait in the back. But Edith did not move to the back. She walked to the side of the room and placed the old blue ceramic tip jar on the table. The yellowed paper still clung to its front, the one that said, "Day staff only." Beneath the peeling edge, just visible, was the painted beam of a lighthouse. Maya went still. Brielle's smile vanished. Victor looked at the jar, then at Edith, and for the first time since Eleanor had met him, something unpolished flickered across his face. The front door opened again. Miriam Chen entered with 2 members of the audit team. Behind her came the head of human resources, company legal counsel, and the board's ethics chair. No one spoke loudly. They did not need to. Real authority has a different weight from performance. It does not have to decorate itself. Victor tried to recover. He greeted them with controlled surprise and began shaping an explanation before he even knew what had to be explained. Eleanor reached up and removed the gray scarf from her hair, then the cap, then the raincoat. For several seconds, the only sound in the flagship was the low hum of refrigeration behind the pastry case. The woman they had ignored, mocked, underpaid, and ordered out of the way was no longer Edith Lane. She was Eleanor Vale, founder and CEO of Hearth and Hollow Bakery. The name on the building, the face from the anniversary videos, the woman whose childhood promise had been printed on every cup in the store. And she had heard enough. She began not with anger, but with memory. She reminded the room that Hearth and Hollow had not been created to impress wealthy customers or polish itself into a brand too delicate for ordinary people. It had been created because once, A mother and daughter, with very little money, were made to feel unworthy of a warm table. Every cup, every bag, every training manual, every painted wall that carried the words, "Warmth belongs to everyone," existed because of that promise. Somewhere inside this flagship, the promise had been turned into decoration. No one interrupted. Victor's expression remained controlled, but the color had begun to drain from his face. Brielle looked toward the windows, as if calculating who might be watching. Kendra folded her arms too tightly, trying to become small after years of making others feel small. Maya stood near the back, still in her work apron, afraid to trust what was happening. Eleanor described what she had seen as Edith Lane, the stale croissant, the coins treated like contamination, Samuel being steered away from the window table, nurses, delivery riders, construction workers, and elderly customers being treated as though their presence lowered the value of the room. She did not exaggerate. Cruelty rarely needs embellishment when it is finally named plainly. Then Miriam placed the first folder on the table. It held customer complaints that had never reached the executive office. Some were formal, some were anonymous. Some were written by employees who had watched customers leave in shame. Each complaint had been softened, reworded, or closed before it could become a problem for the people causing the harm. The phrase repeated again and again, resolved through coaching. In this store, coaching had not meant correction, it had meant burial. The second folder held the tip records. Kendra began to tremble. The audit team had reconstructed 14 months of tip distribution across cash, digital payments, shift edits, and deposit logs. The numbers told a story no one could laugh away. Front counter staff had received far more than policy allowed. Night bakers, dish staff, prep workers, cleaners, and temporary support workers had been systematically underpaid. Cash counts had been changed during shifts where cameras went offline. Digital tips had been routed under categories that favored Brielle and Kendra. Eleanor explained that stealing from workers did not become less serious because it happened in small amounts. It became more shameful because it targeted people least able to absorb the loss. Maya looked down, not because she was ashamed, but because the truth of what had been taken from her had finally been measured. A number can prove what your body already knew. A number can show that you were not imagining the unfairness. A number can turn months of quiet insult into evidence. Victor tried to step in. He began shaping the issue as an administrative breakdown, a training gap, a lack of clarity around policy. The words came easily, dressed in professionalism. But Eleanor knew the language of escape. She opened the third folder. This one contained the complaint trail. 6 formal complaints from Maya Reyes, one about tip distribution, one about discriminatory service, one about a delivery worker refused water, one about the velvet list, one about product ownership, one marked urgent, asking who really baked the sunrise buns. All 6 had been routed to Victor's office. All 6 had been closed before reaching Human Resources or the Ethics Board. Victor stopped speaking. There are moments when guilt becomes visible not through confession, but through the failure to keep pretending. His eyes moved once toward Brielle. It was a small mistake, but the room saw it. Eleanor revealed the undisclosed relationship next. Victor Harlan was married to Brielle's mother. He had supervised Brielle's promotions, closed complaints against her, approved disciplinary notes against employees who challenged her, and never disclosed the conflict. Nepotism might sound like an office rumor until the damage is placed beside it. Here, the damage had names: Maya, Samuel, the nurses, the delivery rider, the night bakers, the dish staff, the workers whose tips were shaved down while Brielle's authority grew. Brielle began to cry, but there is a difference between tears of remorse and tears of exposure. Remorse looks toward the people harmed. Exposure looks inward, toward what the guilty person is about to lose. Brielle's tears did not find Samuel. They did not find Maya. They turned back toward herself. Kendra tried to make herself smaller. She wanted the room to believe she had only followed Brielle, only repeated jokes, only done what the front counter culture demanded. Eleanor did not accept that. A person may not design a cruel system and still choose to enjoy it. Kendra had kept the velvet list beneath the register. Kendra had used it. She had helped decide who received slow service, old pastries, cold eyes, and shame disguised as atmosphere. Then Miriam placed the small notebook from beneath the register beside the tip jar. The velvet list looked harmless from the outside, with a little gold pattern on the cover. Inside were descriptions and labels for customers the cashiers had chosen to discourage: coin man, raincoat woman, scrub ghosts, delivery kid, bench sleeper, slow widow. There were notes about who tipped badly, who paid in change, who took too long, who lowered the look of the room, who should be told seats were limited even when they were not. Samuel had been listed too, not by name at first, but by description: old bus cap, window table, pennies, anniversary mornings. Maya covered her mouth. She knew what those mornings meant to Samuel. She knew because she had bothered to learn. Brielle and Kendra had known enough to use his tenderness against him. That was the difference between service and cruelty. Both notice details. One uses them to care. The other uses them to wound. Samuel had agreed to come in if needed, and Eleanor had made sure he would not be turned into a spectacle. He entered quietly, holding his navy cap. The room shifted with discomfort. People often prefer victims to remain abstract. Numbers can be reviewed. Complaints can be filed. But a person standing in front of you with hurt in his eyes removes the luxury of distance. Samuel did not accuse loudly. He was not built for public anger. His presence was testimony enough. Eleanor summarized what had happened to him with care. He had been a loyal customer since the early days. He had shared this store with his wife. After she passed, the window table helped him remember a part of his life grief had not taken. The cruelty done to him was not just bad service. It was the disrespect of a memory. Samuel placed the worn photograph of himself and June beside the tip jar. In the picture, they sat at the window table, smiling over a shared pastry. It was evidence of another kind, evidence that the people reduced to categories had lives, loves, rituals, and losses. Brielle could not look at him. Only after Samuel was offered the window table did Eleanor turn to the matter everyone had feared most: the sunrise honey buns. On the display table, beneath the tasteful launch sign, the pastries gleamed as if innocent of the theft surrounding them. They were beautiful. That was part of the pain. Maya's work was beautiful. Her care had survived even in the hands of people who wanted her erased. Victor had mistaken that beauty for a product he could own. Eleanor opened Maya's notebook. Maya inhaled sharply, but Eleanor looked toward her first, making it clear that the notebook was not being taken from her anymore. It was being recognized. The pages were shown to the room. Dates appeared, ingredient tests, failed versions. notes about humidity, glaze texture, customer memories, a sketch of a bun designed to catch light, the phrase about making morning feel forgiving, the lighthouse drawn beside the final version. Then Miriam displayed Victor's regional proposal, submitted months later using nearly identical language and product notes that followed Maya's development path almost exactly. Victor tried one final defense. He claimed that ideas developed within store operations belonged to the company. He implied that Maya misunderstood collaborative innovation. He suggested that leadership refined, scattered contributions into scalable products. It sounded intelligent until Eleanor placed one more document on the table. It was the employee innovation policy she herself had approved years earlier. The policy stated clearly that employees who created products selected for regional or national rollout were to receive formal credit, a development bonus, and internal royalty compensation were applicable. Eleanor had insisted on that policy because she knew creativity did not only live in corporate test kitchens. Sometimes it lived in tired people working odd hours, listening closely to customers no executive ever met. Victor had violated policy. More than that, he had violated trust. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged, finally, to the truth. Eleanor then did what everyone had expected Victor to do to Maya. She began the review. But it was not Maya's employment being reviewed. It was the conduct of the people who had built a private kingdom inside a company that was supposed to serve everyone. Brielle Voss was terminated first. Eleanor stated the reasons clearly: discriminatory treatment of customers, retaliation against co-workers, manipulation of tip distribution, and participation in a hostile store culture that directly contradicted company values. Her quarterly bonus would be frozen pending legal review of stolen tips. The matter would be documented fully, not softened into personality conflict, not hidden behind coaching language, and not buried to protect the brand from embarrassment. Brielle looked stunned, as if she had never truly believed consequences were meant for people like her. She had mistaken favoritism for invincibility. Now the shield was gone, and all that remained was the record of what she had done when she thought no one powerful was watching. Kendra Pike was terminated next. Eleanor did not allow her lesser rank to become a hiding place. Kendra had kept the velvet list, helped manipulate tips, participated in customer mistreatment, and turned cruelty into entertainment. Her fear in that moment could not erase the fear she had caused in others. Then Eleanor turned to Victor. The bakery seemed to hold its breath. Victor Harlan was terminated for cause, not asked to resign, not reassigned, not allowed to call it a mutual decision. Terminated. The reasons were placed into the record one by one: undisclosed conflict of interest, retaliation against employees, suppression of formal complaints, falsification of internal summaries, failure to enforce tip policy, theft of employee-created product work, and conduct unbecoming of leadership. His innovation bonuses connected to Maya's recipes would be clawed back. His regional launch authority was revoked immediately. Legal counsel would determine further action based on the financial and intellectual property review. Victor did not rage. Rage would have been too honest. Instead, he looked offended, as if the greater injustice was that his Polish had failed to protect him. When security escorted him out, he passed the wall where the slogan was painted: "Warmth belongs to everyone." For the first time, the words seemed to be looking back at him. But justice could not end with firing the guilty. Punishment stops the breaking from continuing. It does not repair what has already been broken. So Eleanor turned to the staff. This was the harder part. It would have been easy to treat everyone else as innocent because they had not been the loudest. It would have been easy to let the room applaud the fall of villains. But Eleanor had seen too much silence to leave it untouched. She told them that fear was real. She would not pretend childcare, medical bills, and survival did not shape the courage people felt able to show. But she also told them that a company becomes cruel not only when cruel people act, but when decent people decide that looking away is safer than standing beside someone being harmed. No one was fired for being afraid that morning, but no one was allowed to call fear a virtue. Hearth and Hollow would retrain the flagship from the ground up. The regional complaint process would be removed from manager control. Employees would receive direct access to an independent ethics channel. Tip distribution would become transparent on every paycheck. Digital records would be visible to eligible staff. Camera outages during cash handling would trigger automatic review. Undisclosed family reporting relationships would require immediate investigation. And every employee, from the front counter to the dish station to night production, would be treated as part of the guest experience, because the warmth customers feel in the morning often begins with someone unseen working in the dark. Then Eleanor faced Maya. For a moment, the founder of a 58-store company seemed less like a CEO and more like the little girl who once sat near a restroom with her mother, promising herself that someday she would build something kinder. She apologized, not with the easy apology of a public statement, but with the weight of a person taking responsibility for a system built in her name. She admitted that she had allowed reports to replace listening. She had allowed growth to create distance. She had believed the promise because she had written it, when she should have been checking whether others were living it. Maya did not know what to do with the apology. People who have been dismissed for too long sometimes struggle to receive recognition without bracing for the cost. Her eyes moved from Eleanor to the notebook, then to the honey buns in the case, then to the staff who had watched her be corrected, reduced, and nearly erased. Eleanor announced that the national rollout would continue, but it would be corrected. The Sunrise Honey Buns would launch under Maya Reyes's name. Every menu board, training document, product story, and marketing asset would identify her as the creator. She would receive the product development bonus she should have received months earlier, along with back compensation for the internal royalty period Victor had stolen. Her notebook would remain hers, with copies made only by consent and only for documenting authorship. And if Maya chose to continue developing products for Hearth and Hollow, it would be through a formal role with salary, schedule protection, and creative authority. Maya's hand went to the edge of the prep table as if the room had tilted. For so long, her work had been treated as something that could be taken because she needed the job too much to fight back. Now the same work was being named in front of everyone, not borrowed, not inspired by, not refined from a team concept, created by Maya Reyes. Eleanor offered her the position of Regional Product Development Lead for Community Bakery Innovation. It was a role designed not to remove Maya from the people who inspired her work, but to give her the power to bring their stories into the menu without letting anyone steal the credit again. Maya did not answer immediately. The silence was not rejection. It was the sound of a person trying to let dignity return to places where humiliation had been stored. Then Maya nodded. The room exhaled. It would be tempting to say everything changed in that instant. Stories often like clean turning points, but real healing is rarely so neat. The employees who had stayed silent did not become brave all at once. The customers who had been wounded did not magically forget. Maya did not walk out untouched by what had been done to her. Eleanor did not forgive herself simply because she had finally acted. Justice can open a door, but people still have to walk through, carrying the weight of what came before. Yet something real did change. Eleanor reached for the blue tip jar. She peeled away the yellowed paper Brielle had taped across it. The adhesive resisted at first, as if unfairness had become comfortable there. Then the paper tore free. Beneath it, the original words appeared in Maya's careful painted lettering. For everyone who keeps the light on. No one clapped. It would have felt too small, too theatrical. Instead, the staff stood in a silence that finally had respect inside it. Maya touched the jar with her fingertips. The lighthouse she had painted years earlier looked imperfect and beautiful, its beam stretching across the curve of the ceramic. She had made it after putting her daughter to bed, during a time when she still believed the store could become a shared place. That belief had been mocked, covered, and nearly broken. But it had not been erased. The repairs began that week. Every underpaid employee received corrected tip payments, covering 14 months, with interest. For some, it was a few $100s. For others, it was enough to catch up on rent, repair a car, pay a medical bill, or buy groceries without calculating every item twice. Eleanor personally signed the letters that accompanied the payments, though she knew a letter could not undo the insult of needing money that had been yours all along. The flagship closed for retraining, not for a cosmetic renovation, for a reckoning. The polished tables stayed. The pastry case stayed. The slogan stayed. But the meaning of the room changed because the people inside it were forced to face what they had allowed. Several employees apologized to Maya privately. Some apologies were awkward. Some were late. Some were more about guilt than repair. Maya accepted none too quickly. She had learned that kindness without change could become another performance. But over time, she allowed certain people to earn back small pieces of trust. The junior cashier who had once stayed silent began arriving early to help night staff transition into morning service. The dishwasher, who had feared losing hours, joined the new employee council. The shift lead who had let Brielle dominate the front counter stepped down from leadership until retraining was complete. Not everyone became noble, but some became honest, and honesty was a beginning. Samuel returned on the reopening morning. There were no cameras invited. Eleanor refused to turn his pain into a marketing campaign. No press release mentioned him. No staged photograph was posted. Maya baked the first tray herself, though her new role no longer required her to arrive before dawn. She said she wanted to make this batch with her own hands, not for the company, for the table by the window. When Samuel entered, he paused the way he always did. The room was different, though the furniture had not moved much. The difference was in the attention. No one rushed him. No one sighed at his coins. No one steered him away from sunlight. A fresh sunrise honey bun waited for him, not as charity, not as apology wrapped in pity, but as the restoration of ordinary respect. Maya had written his name on the bag in blue ink. Samuel sat at the window table and placed June's photograph beside his coffee. For a while, he simply looked at the pastry. Grief does not disappear because a bakery becomes kinder. A dead wife does not return because a table is saved. But cruelty had added an unnecessary wound to Samuel's mourning, and that wound, at least, could be tended. He broke the bun in half, as he used to do when June was alive. One half remained on the napkin across from him. Maya turned away for a moment, not because she wanted to hide from sadness, but because some forms of love are too private to stare at directly. Eleanor watched from a distance. She thought of her mother. She thought of that winter bakery. She thought of how easily a child's wound had become a company, and how easily a company had almost become the very thing that caused the wound. That was the danger of success. It could make people forget that every polished system began as someone's answer to pain. Maya's new work changed Hearth and Hollow slowly. She did not create products by chasing trends. She listened. She visited night crews, bus depots, hospital break rooms, laundromats, early morning markets, and stores where employees had spent years believing their ideas did not count. She asked workers what they ate when no one saw them. She asked widows what food reminded them of being loved. She asked parents what they bought when they had enough for only one treat. From those answers came pastries that did not feel invented by a committee. They felt remembered into being. The first menu under Maya's leadership kept the sunrise honey bun in its place, but now the menu card carried her name clearly. Created by Maya Reyes, some customers barely noticed. Employees noticed most of all. In break rooms across the region, bakers who had spent years believing ideas only counted when managers repeated them began writing things down. Dishwashers suggested waste-reducing fillings. Baristas proposed pairings based on regulars they knew by heart. Prep workers shared family breads. The company discovered that creativity had never been scarce. It had only been ignored. Eleanor changed, too. She stopped trusting beautiful reports without ugly questions. She visited stores without warning, not to frighten people, but to listen before language became polished. She created a monthly founders table where employees from any level could speak without regional managers in the room. She tied leadership bonuses not only to revenue, but to staff retention, complaint resolution quality, tip transparency, and customer dignity. Some executives resisted the changes quietly. They worried about cost, complexity, exposure, and risk. Eleanor reminded them that the greater risk had already walked through the flagship wearing a raincoat and carrying coins. A company that cannot survive honesty does not deserve protection from it. As for Victor, Brielle, and Kendra, their consequences continued beyond that Monday. Victor lost his innovation bonuses and his reputation for calm excellence. Once the stolen labor and borrowed language were removed, there was little left behind his polished vocabulary. Brielle learned that charm and family protection could open doors, but could not keep them open after trust was gone. Kendra learned that cruelty enjoyed in groups can still be accounted for individually. None of them were destroyed for entertainment. They were simply made to live in a world where the consequences they had given others finally reached them. That was poetic justice, not because it was dramatic, but because it was exact. They had made people feel unwelcome, and they lost their place in the company. They had stolen tips, and the money was taken back. Victor had erased Maya's name, and his own name was removed from the launch he had tried to claim. Brielle had covered the lighthouse on the tip jar, and now the whole company saw what she had tried to hide. Months later, on a cold morning much like the one that had first brought Eleanor's mother into that old bakery decades ago, the flagship store filled before sunrise. Not with influencers, not with investors, not with people chosen for how well they matched the brand. It filled with bus drivers, nurses, office workers, parents, delivery riders, Retirees, students, and construction crews warming their hands around paper cups. Some paid with cards, some paid with cash, some counted coins. No one behind the counter made them feel smaller for it. Maya stood near the pastry case, no longer hidden in the back unless she chose to be. Her daughter Lucia had come in before school, wearing a backpack nearly half her size. She pointed at the menu where her mother's name appeared beneath the sunrise honey bun. Children understand recognition more purely than adults do. To Lucia, those words meant her mother had made something beautiful, and the world had finally admitted it. Eleanor watched Maya lift her daughter so she could see the lighthouse tip jar on the counter. The original paint had been sealed to protect it, but its imperfections remained. The beam was uneven. The letters curved slightly. The blue glaze had a tiny chip near the base. No designer would have approved it as a national brand asset. That was why Eleanor loved it. It was not perfect. It was true. Samuel sat at the window table, his coffee steaming beside June's photograph. No one rushed him. No one treated his grief as an inconvenience. Sometimes Maya sat with him for a minute before her meetings. Sometimes they said very little. Warmth does not always need many words. Sometimes it is simply allowing someone to remain where love once found them. The slogan on the wall stayed the same. Warmth belongs to everyone. But after everything that happened, those words no longer felt like paint. They felt like a responsibility renewed each morning by the people who unlocked the doors, mixed the dough, wiped the tables, counted the tips, and chose how to see whoever walked in next. Because cruelty rarely enters a workplace wearing a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears a clean apron and a practiced smile. Sometimes it speaks in policy language. Sometimes it calls discrimination atmosphere, theft adjustment, retaliation coaching, and silence professionalism. And kindness, real kindness, is not proven by how warmly people treat someone powerful. Anyone can smile upward. Character is revealed in how people treat the tired woman with coins, the old man with a photograph, the night baker with flour on her sleeves, and the worker whose name is not printed anywhere yet. Eleanor learned that a company can lose its soul one small permission at a time, one ignored complaint, one stolen idea, one cruel joke, one old pastry handed to someone deemed unworthy of fresh bread, one manager who protects family instead of truth, one room full of people who see harm and decide silence is safer. But a soul can also be recovered. One honest act at a time, one complaint finally read, one notebook protected, one tip jar uncovered, one name restored, one table returned to a grieving man, one worker reminded that the light she kept burning in the dark was seen after all. Maya did not become important on the day Eleanor revealed the truth. She had always been important. Samuel did not become worthy when the CEO apologized. He had always been worthy. The night staff did not become part of the guest experience when policy finally recognized them. They had always been part of it. Justice did not create their value. Justice only forced the company to stop denying it. And maybe that is the lesson worth carrying beyond one bakery, one counter, one stolen recipe, or one hidden notebook. Kindness is not a slogan on a wall. It is not a polished logo, a seasonal campaign, or a sentence printed on a cup. Kindness is what remains when no one is filming, when the customer has no influence, when the employee has no protection, when the complaint would be easier to bury, and when doing the right thing costs more than saying the right thing. So the next time you stand in line and see someone being treated as if they do not belong, remember Samuel at the window table. Remember Maya in the night kitchen. Remember the old blue tip jar with the lighthouse painted on it. And remember that silence may feel safe in the moment, but it always helps someone build a darker room. If you believe every hardworking person deserves to be seen, leave a like and tell us in the comments. Would you have spoken up if you had been standing in that line?